Well, let's call the meeting to order. I guess that's the official thing, right? The City Council work session for May 18th is currently called to order. A roll call, please, Sue.
Councillor Piros,
Here.
Councillor Johnson,
Here.
Councillor Yarnell Holloman,
Here.
Councillor Martinez Blancarte,
Here.
Mayor Rogers,
Here.
Councillor Bacon,
Here.
Councillor Finley.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, all present.
Thank you. All right, to all the listeners or viewers at home, this is, as you see, a virtual meeting. During the course of the actual business session, there will be a process to sign in for public comment when we get to that. But as to the work session, item 3, review of the council agenda and meet. Any comments regarding the business session, folks? Hearing none, let's move on to the business item. What about 4A, the March 2020 fund financial statements? Any questions for Matt or for Dan? Okay, hearing none. All right, presentations. 5A, safe and reliable water future update, and I believe this is Karen.
It is. Good evening,
All right.
Mayor. We also have Brian Ginter and Ronan on the line, and I believe they are been promoted to help me give this presentation. So here we go. So we've talked before about investing, our project investing in a safe and reliable water future. And tonight's agenda is, we'll give you a quick recap of where, what the project is, some preliminary outreach findings, the water supply analysis update, including some outreach and alternatives criteria development, next steps, and then allow for council Q&A. Next slide, please, Sue. And actually, next slide, please. So we talked before, back in February, I believe, about the different projects that all take up and a part of the safe and reliable water future. There's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that are all fit together. One informs the other, and back and forth amongst each other, actually. The seismic resiliency study is completing soon, and that information is feeding into the water supply analysis about how reliable is our system in the sense of an earthquake. We also talked before about the risk and resilience assessment, the WIA compliance, which is a requirement of the federal government for us to look at our system, both the infrastructure, the standard infrastructure you think of as water, and also the financial systems and our information technology systems. So it's kind of all of those pieces go together. And then there's water rights and infrastructure, excuse me, acquisition options out there also. So next slide, please. So where we've been to date is phase 1 was completed in September. The council move on to phase 2 with the goals listed there, using 2 to 8 million gallons a day for the goal ranges to evaluate options. In fact, investigate the feasibility of using and or acquiring water rights for ourselves, and then to initiate a public engagement process. Where we are today, we're in phase 2, scope of work, the alternatives analysis. We've been working on community input and education. It did make a difference, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic. We didn't have the public outreach out as soon as we had hoped, but it is out and underway, and we'll be giving you an update on that. So with that, next slide, please. And Brian's going to take over.
Thank you, Karen. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick summary of the preliminary results of the community survey that's been done. We actually have good results so far. So we launched on April 22nd. We've got 41 or 42 surveys completed so far, which is actually a pretty good number for this kind of survey. And as you see here from the percentages, it's a nice spread of customers that have been in the city for a shorter period of time and some longtime Newberg residents. The other thing that I wanted to point out here is that there is a good portion of the population that knows where their water came from. So that's good, but there's still a lot of people that don't either. So certainly a public education program around water is a valuable tool. We'll be back to give you more complete results in July when we give the next presentation. So these are just kind of a sneak peek at this point. And then with that, we'll go next slide. Next slide, please.
There was somebody outside at the door and the door was locked. So I think Sue ran out to unlock the door.
All right, thank you. There we go. So I did want to highlight two things that I think are important. Both your existing water quality and water service received really good scores. And so want to let you know that feedback was really positive. That means you're standing in a good place in terms of customer confidence as we go forward, which is important because this is potentially a very large project, has the potential to be contentious, but you're in a good place to start with. And next slide. Oh, there we go. So I think the headline here kind of tells it all. Most respondents said it is important for Newberg to have a backup water supply. And so as people are learning more about your water supply situation, folks are saying, hey, we really do want to make sure that we have a backup water supply. In the lower right-hand corner of the slide, there's also kind of highlighting what were the topics that were most interesting to folks. And emergency preparedness is still on the top of people's lists. We see developing a reliable backup supply and drinking water quality. So those top three items all do tie together with this idea of developing a redundant supply. A lot of the questions that folks asked really did focus on water quality and cost. This will be an expensive project, whatever you choose to do. And I don't want to spend too much time on it now, but I think it is important to note that both our options do focus around the Willamette River, and water quality in the Willamette River has been a hot topic in the past. And so I think it's going to be really important as we go forward to make sure that there is a robust education program with that. So people understand, where is the Willamette River being used as a drinking water supply, kind of addressing the facts versus the myths about water from the Willamette River. Next slide. Again, here, this is just another way of looking at how they ranked what they thought was the most important when considering a second source of water. And this really does get to developing our criteria for evaluating the options. And again, number one on the list is safe, high quality water. You see that preparing for natural disasters or an earthquake is important, and ranking very high is high benefit with the lowest cost. So not surprisingly, citizens are cost sensitive, and so that's going to be a major factor. We'll come back to how these play into the criteria a little later in the presentation. Next slide. So we're also working on stakeholder interviews. Those are in progress. They are moving a little slower than planned, just because typically, it's easier to catch people during their workday when we're all working our regular jobs in our office. So we're working through these, and we'll have results in July. But based on the early responses, they've been positive. People are supportive of the plan for redundant supply. Education of public was one of the key things that was the takeaway from the stakeholder interviews done so far for this to move forward, because of both the cost and the fact that we're likely talking about the Willamette River as the source. It's going to be, again, very critical that the public is educated. With that kind of covers, again, preliminary results. We will be back with more information and complete findings from this public outreach program, but wanted to get you some initial information here, and then we'll come back to it in July. Next slide. and then it'll be one more after that. So let me give a quick update on the water supply analysis. You saw this slide last time. I just want to remind you that right now we're focusing on getting information from regional supply partners, getting input from the public, and selecting an alternative before we move forward with the next steps. We'll be working on feasibility, cost, and schedule for the two options here over the next month or so, and then coming back in July for council concurrence after we've met with city management staff. Next slide. So just a reminder, we're looking at two primary alternatives. I'll call them the local and the regional option, both on stretches of the Willamette River. Local would be supply from the Willamette River near or adjacent to or in Newberg. And the second option is east of McMinnville on the river near Dayton. Next slide. So zooming in a little bit on option one, this figure illustrates kind of conceptually both your existing water supply infrastructure from the well field across the river and what the where the proposed infrastructure would be. So the red oval highlights the existing river intakes that exist on the West Rock Mill site, and that's the ideal kind of target location for a potential river intake. And then a new treatment facility adjacent to the existing treatment plant that is located within the footprint of the West Rock property. And then from there, the water would be supplied to the city the same way the existing groundwater is from the treatment plant pumped into the system. And the next slide. So just, I think I covered a lot of this just there on the previous slide accidentally, but infrastructure needed is, again, treatment facility, intake are the primary things. In terms of potential time constraints on this alternative, it's property acquisition, water rights acquisition, and permitting for the in-water work. And then this option does have the opportunity for partnership with the city of Dundee, possibly, which would be, they'd primarily be a partner that would share the cost, and then they would need to build a pipeline to extend the water to Dundee. Next slide. So the second option, the regional option, here, this is just big picture view of it, and this time I'll remember to go to the next slide before talking about it. So next slide, please. So here, the primary infrastructure that would be specific for Newberg would be about 9 miles of pipe from city of McMinnville up to Newberg, and then participation in a future Willamette River intake and treatment plant located down between Dayton and McMinnville. So that's the kind of aqua blue color, shows those facilities. And then in terms of time constraints, really it's that if you've got major partners, and McMinnville would be a major partner, then you've got some external drivers in terms of when you develop, because you really can't move forward on your own. And so the constraint here is that you've got to coordinate with partners, and you're going to be working and balancing each other's timelines. In terms of partnership opportunities, again, Dundee is a potential partner here as well. And then this would be development with McMinnville Water Light at a minimum, or the Yamhill Regional Water Authority as a kind of overarching governing entity for this regional supply. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ronan to talk about the analysis criteria.
Thanks, Brian. This is Ronan Gloria with GSI Water Solutions. I just want to go over the analysis criteria. As Brian explained, there's two primary alternatives that the study's looking at, the local and the regional Willamette supply. And the outcome of phase 2 really is to come up with a preferred alternative. If you recall the slide that Karin had shown there with kind of the 3 different phases, this phase is going to lead to the phase 3, which is going to look at a more engineered sort of analysis and development of the design for whatever alternative is recommended on the phase that we're in. So the criteria that we're developing here at this stage, we wanted to share with you kind of just a preliminary definition or identification of what those criteria are. it'll be important for us to use those criteria then to evaluate these two primary alternatives, taking into account the input that we get from council tonight and in the subsequent days and weeks ahead here as we go through the analysis. What we want to do with these criteria is identify criteria that are sort of differentiating. There's similarities with these alternatives that we're looking at, and so to come up with kind of a robust comparison and a robust recommendation, we want to be able to differentiate the alternatives, but taking into account the information that we're receiving from the outreach activities. So a lot of the values, the things that are important to ratepayers and the citizens, as well as the council and the decision makers, are what we want to try to get out of folks at this meeting that we can then apply as we further define the criteria. And in the next slide, we'll show you the criteria, but they're basically, at this point, based on our combined consulting experience, our familiarity with the goals of the reliability study, and then again, as I mentioned, the feedback and input that we're getting from the outreach activities that's currently going on right now. And then coming out of this meeting, we'll refine the criteria, we'll create explicit definitions for those criteria and how we'll apply them in the evaluation, including whether we want to do a sort of more qualitative application of the criteria versus more quantitative, where we're doing numerical scoring. So we'll kind of look at how the criteria develop and what makes the most sense in terms of how we can differentiate the alternatives. So with that as kind of context for the criteria, if you can get to the next slide, please. So this is just a preliminary list of the criteria, general criteria. As I mentioned, we'll define these explicitly moving forward to actually apply them. But we want to kind of list these major 7 or so criteria, get some of your feedback on them, kind of thinking about, if you have any questions about these criteria, are we capturing kind of the main points that you would think of when you're looking at these alternatives? And are we missing any criteria that kind of comes to your mind at this point? We'll obviously be looking for feedback over the next couple of weeks as well, but wanted to get some early feedback if you have any tonight. So just going down the list, the first criteria here is life cycle costs. That includes capital, so upfront capital construction costs. What's the cost over the life of the alternative, so for operation and maintenance. And then as part of this, and we can break this out or keep it together, but are there sort of funding source implications for the alternative? Can the city secure certain funding for one or both of the alternatives? That could be a consideration in terms of which one's selected. The second criteria here is ownership and partners. Brian mentioned, especially with the regional one, there's some issues there in terms of being able to coordinate and then being partnered up. There's advantages and disadvantages with partnerships. The local one, you'll have primarily sole ownership versus the partnership requirements in the regional alternative. You'll have to deal with supply contracts as well. So those are considerations under that criteria. The third criteria here is, one of the drivers for the study is the reliability and resilience that each alternative might provide. So how does the alternative provide long-term water source reliability of a long-term source? How does it fit into the seismic resiliency goals for the study for the city, as well as infrastructure? What's the reliability and resilience of associated infrastructure with each of those alternatives? Just as an example, for the regional one has a lengthy pipeline that could be a consideration in terms of the reliability, resilience of that alternative. The fourth criteria here, implementation schedule. Again, with both alternatives, there's timing considerations. There's more of an external driver for the regional alternative because you're having to deal with multiple partners and timelines that may be outside the city's control. And then let's see here, the fifth one, water quality and source. Again, Brian mentioned the Willamette River is associated with both of these alternatives, and there's been some history about water quality concerns and some education that is going to need to kind of play a role in the evaluation of these alternatives. So in this case, water quality, because both of the sources of water for both alternatives are the Willamette River, this may not provide as much of a differentiation between the two alternatives, but it is a factor that I think nevertheless we want to look at because of the history of some of the concerns around Willamette River as a source. The sixth criteria, operational complexity, that is associated more with, does the city have the staffing resources to effectively operate one of the given alternatives? The Willamette regional supply, there'll be some staffing, shared staffing with a partnership, and so that won't all fall into the city in terms of having to staff and operate the alternative source. There's also considerations in terms of integrating into the way you operate your system now. So those are two main factors in terms of the operational complexity. And then the last criteria we have listed here is sort of the phasing opportunities for developing the given alternative. So is there room for expansion? Is it a commitment upfront? Is there a way to phase the development of that supply so that the city can take advantage of sort of incremental benefits to either one of the alternatives? And of course, that leads to the ability to kind of spread costs over time if there's an ability to phase the development of a given alternative. So that's just a quick run through of the general criteria that we've identified and we're looking at. Again, kind of next steps is we'll refine these. We'll include specific definitions of these criteria and how we're going to be applying them and how we're going to be sort of quote unquote scoring each alternative based on these criteria. So, for discussion after we present this information, if you have questions on these criteria or ideas of anything we've missed, or just even questions on any of these criteria, we're happy to discuss these after the presentation. So I'll give it back to Brian.
Thanks, Ronan. And actually, I'll stop here. We've just got one slide after this that's scheduled, and so this actually might not be a terrible time to pause. If there are any thoughts or questions, comments on the criteria, we would take those now. Otherwise, we'll get to the last part.
Fire away, folks, if you have any questions. Hearing none, I think, Brian, and I think we're good.
All right, we'll go next slide then. So just a quick update on where we're at on schedule. Here we are in May. We're working through refining those criteria you just saw and the conceptual designs. In June, we'll do a quick fatal flaw analysis just to make sure that there's not something we've overlooked that eliminates one of these two options. We'll be developing the cost estimating that we know is going to be a critical factor in the decision making. Get a little more information from the partners, get through the alternatives analysis and develop recommendations in coordination with staff. And so in June, we'll be anticipating having some workshops with city staff to work through this process so that we can come back to you in July at the beginning of the month, having provided you a draft document to review and then report back to you, get confirmation that we're on the right track, finalize the draft, and wrap up phase 2 with the final presentation in August, and then going through scoping for phase 3 once there's a selected alternative. So again, the goal here is to move through the rest of this project through the summer and move forward with the next steps that will inform implementation timing, funding, and all of those fun next steps. And I think the next slide should be the Q&A if there's any other questions.
All right, any other questions or comments, folks? Well, hearing none, I have to just thank you, Karn, Brian, and Ronnie. Thank you very much. I guess we've gotten to the point where it's Willamette River water or it's Willamette River water. So, I mean, as you mentioned, that, the first reaction is going to be two-headed fish. So, that's going to be a bit of a lift, but otherwise, thank you. All right. Anything else on the subject of safe and reliable water, folks?
Just know you're going to be seeing us a lot this summer, different water projects. You'll see the seismic resiliency information this summer, along with another update on the redundant water supply. So you'll be hearing more about water as we move through the summer.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. We look forward to it, Carm. There we go. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. All right. Moving on. Jules, can you tell us about the Oregon Worker Relief Fund?
Yes, I can do that, Rick. So I will be talking today about the Oregon Workers Relief Fund. And so this, as we have navigated through COVID, and I heard this from Rick as one of the meetings on Friday that he does with stakeholders here in the community, how we are all in this pandemic and we are all in different, on the same boat. But at the same time, I think different communities are facing different issues. So we're all, battling our own financial needs or whatever that may be. And one community that's really being left out is the immigrant community. And so the problem that has been identified is that the immigrant community is being left out of financial assistance, whether that's through the economic impact check or the unemployment benefits. So there's a big sector in our community of folks who, because of their legal status, don't qualify for either of those assistance. Not only that, but it's also a lot of their citizen children who, because of their parents' use of an ITIN number when filing for taxes, are not able to receive any assistance. And a lot of these families are a lot of the families that are essential workers. So they're the farmers. They are the folks that are working in our fast food dining. It's a lot of those folks. And so the solution is to fund a community-based system that would provide financial assistance for those who cannot access public benefits. This is a short-term financial assistance just to help people pick them back up on their feet during this time. And here in Oregon, there's about a 74,000 person need that is needed to support this. And some of the organizations that are leading these efforts include CAUSA, the immigration support organization here in Oregon, Latino Network, PECUN, among others that you saw in your packet. And there has been an initial $10 million initial funding from the state emergency assistance, as well as $300,000 from the Oregon Food Bank. But this only covers about 8% of the need, since there needs to be about $124 million raised to support these families. And so also one really good thing that they did when developing this Oregon Workers Relief Fund is that they made sure that rural communities, such as the one that we live in, that folks are being represented when they're being funded. So about 33% minimum of those of the funds have to go to rural communities. I mean, more than that is better, but 33% minimum have to go to the to rural communities. And organizations, ideally, there are, I believe, 5 organizations that have started already helping their clients apply for this funding. And the reason for those 5 organizations was so that they can test if the application is working or any other technological problems that they may be going through. So that's the initial. And we're hoping that other organizations in different counties will be able to access those funds as well. And so here in our county, Unidos would be the organization that has requested to be able to help the families here. And the organizations would directly help the families apply for the funding. And so a lot of the Latinx and immigrant community is not as tech savvy or still don't know how to use a lot of these Google forms. And so that's the purpose behind personally helping out people. Let me see. Yeah, I think I covered some of that. And I think it's really important to note that 2 of the biggest communities nearby here, which include Washington County and also the city of Woodburn, have the statistics that have been demonstrated there is that the majority of the cases that are where folks are testing positive for COVID are a lot of these Latinx and immigrant communities. And so it's really important that our community be in between these 2 other communities for us to pay attention that a lot of these folks, whether we're telling them hey, you need to not work, but for a lot of folks, since they don't have a stimulus check or they don't have, are able to have unemployment benefits, they're going out there in the community and potentially putting themselves and other people more at risk because they don't have that financial support. Yes, let me know if you have any other questions. I know I just kind of like shoved everything out.
All right. Any questions, folks? A little bit of background. Jules was kind enough to arrange a call with Dan and I, which included some storytelling from local folks about, what they're currently facing. So, one thing I'd like to underscore, and I think this is well known, but I've not heard it put this way before. Taxpayers who pay based on an ITIN number or a individual tax identification number, right, do not have any access to benefits of these types, stimulus checks, unemployment, TANF, any of this. So essentially they are left on their own, but yet having paid taxes throughout their lives here in Oregon, maybe they have 3 or 4 children who are American citizens, they can still not access the benefit. So it's a big problem. And actually, Jules referenced the call on our weekly Friday community partner call. And we had someone speak from Virginia Garcia Health Clinic. And they said the disproportionate number of cases among folks who are ITIN taxpayers is remarkable and frightening. But again, it makes sense, at least in their estimation it was, because as Jules said, if you can't receive any kind of benefits, you have no choice but to go to work, even if you're not feeling well. So it's a big problem, but Unidos laid out levels of support for this particular fund that they're trying to gather support in the legislature. Anywhere from endorsing it by proclamation of the city all the way up to contributing money. So my suggestion would be that we ask staff to come back with thoughts on how we might, if you all concur, show either support for this in terms of a resolution or all the way up to funding. So, but your thoughts, folks.
Hi, it's Elise. I would like staff to come back with a resolution of financial support.
I concur.
All right. Anyone else?
Yes, I do too.
Me too.
Makes perfect sense.
Okay. Well, that looks like and Jules, I suppose you support this. Yep. So there's the all right. So if we could, staff, is that Dan and all, is that enough to go with?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was looking back at my notes from the call that we had last week, and I think I've got some of the narrative from that to probably put into something, some level of detail. And obviously, I think probably the folks in Unitas would help us add a little color commentary as needed. But we could definitely come back if we have a time frame for that. That'd be helpful. Just I'm not sure from the process standpoint at the state if there is maybe a date that we would need to get this by, and maybe that's driven a little bit by today's news that the governor is likely to call a special session. So I don't know if this comes up.
Yeah, Dan, and I will check in with Causa about that.
Yeah, and one other thing. Speaking of Causa, I did speak with Isa Pena, who lives here, right, and works for Causa. And one of the questions was whether or not she knew of any communities that were providing direct financial assistance to their own residents. I was curious as to, like Jules mentioned, Woodburn has been really hard hit, and whether they had, and she didn't know of any. So this seems to be the mechanism that they're really pushing. So there you are. So, all right. Good enough. Well, Jules, thank you so much for bringing that up. That's tremendously important. So thank you. Looks like we're a little early on the agenda, which is awesome. Dan, are you ready for your city manager's report?
Yeah, I can do that. and I will try to be relatively brief, even though this is the one that we'll publish. It is 10 pages long of all kinds of activity in the city, which is great to, I think will be great to read, but I will not read all of it right now because that would take forever. So generally speaking, the top of this, a level of coronavirus update, and all of this continues to change even as of today. So what I just referenced, it sounds like the legal challenge to the governor's orders was successful, at least initially, and so we're now thrown into a new level of chaos. But obviously, our county was able to apply for and be allowed to open phase 1 on the 15th on last Friday, and I definitely noticed a higher level of activity in downtown and around the community, and I think that's a good thing. Obviously, on some level, I would personally have liked to see more people wear masks, face masks, and things of that nature. But I think that there was a good amount of foot traffic in some of our businesses, and they certainly need it. So we will continue to monitor the situation. What we're working on as staff is we've continued to have our local support programs, and give you a quick recap on those. And we are also working on a reopening plan for city operations, which likely would start around June 1st. It's for a beginning of the opening process, but we're doing a survey of our staff and some of their concerns to try to build a better plan. And we're about, I would say, 2/3 of the way, 3/4 through building a plan. So we're trying to get some input on some thoughts we have, and sort of a soft opening where we would continue to allow telework and some of those things, but continue to also provide service. And so I'll provide a little more detail there. Just a quick recap of the programs we had provided. The Berg program, we did 62 grants, as I think you're aware. As of Friday, the Support Local Challenge, we, I believe, are at a total receipts of $247,919.88, which is great to see. The credits on that were issued at $96,150. And I will note that we are getting close to our appropriated threshold. So we will, at this point, plan on continuing the program through the end of May. But I think at that point, likely stop providing the rebates. I'm not sure if that news would cause a run on participation or not, but I think we've provided a good amount, and we'll try to bring a supplemental budget to fund the remainder on top of the $100,000 we appropriated sometime in the future. The other thing that would be of note, and something that we mentioned on our call with the folks with the Oregon Workers Relief Fund, is that we have received a number of donations. So as of right now, in that submission of receipts, we have received $13,422.52 of donated receipts, which has amounted to a little over $8,000, $8,055 actually, into our undesignated pool. And so we won't need to try to connect people with that funding, people who are in need. So it's good news that there's an additional money there, but we need to make sure we're connecting folks with that. The third program we did participate in is also going well, which is the contribution to YCAP for homeless or at-risk homeless services, taking people off the street who might be at risk of contracting COVID, and essentially getting them in a hotel using a hotel voucher program. And so there are folks being housed in Newberg and in McMinnville. We participated with the Yamhill County, McMinnville, and we're seeking assistance, financial assistance from some of the smaller towns. So we've got 3 programs that we did. I'm proud of the fact that we were able to do that in the community in a relatively short period of time. And we're now looking to make sure that we're successful in completing those. I already mentioned working on opening plans and that sort of thing. I think one of the other items there is, sort of buried here, so I'll jump around a little bit. Sorry for the discontinuity here, but what I've been working on is, I've mentioned to you all the recruitment process for the department heads. We did sign a contract with Waldron, who had previous experience with the city. It sort of felt like it made sense, both from the previous experience and also because talking to all the recruiters that we were able to interview really got a sense that people are unlikely to move for a job at this current time. I may be the crazy one and the one who's willing to take that risk, but it sort of felt like a more regional approach made a lot of sense. And so I think that's what we are going to look at. We did sign an agreement where there are 2 positions that we will recruit for, with an option for the city to pull the trigger on a third one, which would be the police chief recruitment. Felt like, given the time frame, I want to make sure that Chief Kosmicki has enough time to settle in, to perform, and to be evaluated fairly, rather than immediately trying to go into a recruitment process or do anything of that nature. And then we were also able to add a sweetener for Doug, trying to recruit for the planning manager position, sort of. So getting that some assistance on a little bit of recruitment help there as part of the deal. So hopefully that'll help us in succession planning. That was the intent with the planning manager position, and all work out great. So we shall see as that process starts to unfold, but I'll reach back out to council to include you in some interview process around the recruiter process. So should be interesting. And I'm very much looking forward to getting going, given what I have to talk to you later, and generally just the getting settled into this position with some staff who are a little bit maybe in their seats for the permanent as opposed to the temporary time frame. We have met the city recorder and myself and talked a little bit about the election cycle that we are going to have coming forward. So she's going to get information out shortly for candidates interested in filing. That will likely run where I believe the first time frame to submit petitions or pay the $25 is June 3rd, and that period will run until August 17th. And we are talking about a fall orientation event of some fashion. Will be dictated by COVID, I think, as far as candidate orientation and preparation for those folks running for council. Just a couple very quick non-updates. I don't know how to phrase these, but just wanted to let you know that the city continues to coordinate with West Rock on the sale of their property. And I have not received any updates from CIS, the insurer, on any of our pending legal matters. So nothing to report, but keeping track of those items as we go forward. From community engagement, I wanted to highlight the physically distant, socially connected calendar that's on the website and is a Google form calendar, so people can add events to that in the community. Hopefully will be a long-lived calendar that we'll work on not just now, but through the future, because we're, I think, trying to address one of our community vision goals with that. It seems to be working well, and because it can be, it's something that the public can enter events onto. Hopefully it'll work for everybody in the community. The other item there from community engagement was promotion of census activities, and we're at 66.6% of a response rate as of today. So doing pretty well, but obviously can continue to do better. I think for those who are not looking forward to a knock on the door from a census taker, you may go online and fill it out. So I'd encourage you to do that. Let's see, in addition to those events, I think Lacey's been busy promoting other things, including Safe Routes to School project and urban renewal feasibility and compost, which seems to be a big hit at Public Works. And I think just jumping down to finance, we're looking at court operations resuming, I think June 2nd at this point. We had to write tickets to a date certain, so that was the best we had at the time, assuming that we'd be able to accommodate that, and I think we can. So we're working on a plan to do that safely. let's see, what else? The police and dispatch are working on updates to the CAD RMS system through the pandemic, and dispatch has been updating their emergency medical dispatch EMD cards. Those are cards that they use when someone calls with a specific issue, medical issue. They can run through the instructions with that individual, so they're very consistent with how they can respond to those issues and hopefully be successful in providing assistance to someone who calls. And those are being updated so that they're consistent with WACA. So hopefully a good thing all around. The police are also waiting, I think should receive soon, the delivery of new evidence storage system. So the original system is not meeting their size needs, and so they're able to use the same footprint in the existing building and store 60% more evidence. So hopefully a good thing. Hopefully we don't need that much, but at some level it's good to have and to be updated and be more secure. So hopefully that will get done sometime in June. The court, they are coordinating, essentially trying to get a flow there for municipal court that will go essentially one direction. So come in the back and go out the front, as it were, go out towards where you'd pay and what is the normal entrance point. So I think that'll likely be the system. We'll test it before we go, but June 2nd, we've got about 80 people we're expecting for court. June 9th, we're expecting 120. So we'll have a couple chances to test that in the near future. And we're looking to make sure we have, staff as PPE, that individuals coming to court are safe, that our staff is safe, and that there's minimal touch on those court dates. The library, as you will see when you see the report in print, went and created graphics. So he has some visuals for you. Essentially talking about the activity, the level of activity, which has been actually quite impressive at the library of late. As you know, they have participated in the Newberg mask force. So as of the 12th, he's reporting that 3,679 masks have been delivered in the community, which is pretty dang amazing. And they're high quality masks. I have a couple of them myself. I did want to note that the library also in April hit a new milestone where 5,037 registered readers. So that was about 40% increase from pre-COVID. They had, essentially an average of 3,050. So, it's pretty impressive. I think obviously people are looking for activities to do at home, and it's great to see people are reading and taking advantage of the library programs. And I guess the highest, the busy day for e-checkouts was April 18th. So maybe, it was a Saturday. So maybe this Saturday we can, people will be able to exceed that, but it was 7,484 checkouts on that day. It's like 3,000 more than the previous month, which is, it's kind of an amazing thing. They're planning also for a socially distanced summer reading program. And the theme this year is Imagine Your Story. So you can imagine the impacts of COVID on your story, maybe, I'm not sure. Let's see, from community development, and there's a level of ongoing activity that's summarized in the report, just approvals and reviews and all kinds of activities. The timelines do not stop for Doug and staff, and the level of inspections have not stopped for building department staff, or really for planning as well. It's one of those things that they've been safe, they've done things to protect themselves, but none of that really changed with any of the restrictions we had from the state. They are currently working with the county on required land use processes for the Riverfront Master Plan. So it's exciting for those who are fans of that plan, trying to get ready, get ourselves prepared for any of the infrastructure or any of the pre-infrastructure planning that we need to do, and to get information out to the property owners in that area. So that we're working on that right now. From an economic development standpoint, urban renewal you had a presentation. I think that was mentioned there was going to be a PowerPoint explaining how urban renewal and tax increment financing work. And so that is underway as well, kind of a PowerPoint with a voiceover. So it should be coming soon for information purposes. And something that was a little bit of a hot button, I think, in the community, we updated information to the Postal Service for ordinal directions. And I believe I saw a few questions on that. I don't believe that there's any action residents need to take. It's really just updating information to the post office that we had already provided in some way. So in any event, I think to the extent that we can manage that change, it's really just an update of information. There's no action required. From IT, the IT master plan is being finalized by the vendor, and I believe they're scheduled for the 3rd of August, but we'll confirm that. They are scheduled to come to present that plan to council. This week is Public Works, National Public Works Week. So in addition to the library's theme, the theme of the week of the year is the rhythm of public works. And, definitely, as Russ notes, the rhythm has been disrupted. They're trying to get the band back and get things working, but, they've definitely adapted and continued to provide a great level of service through the COVID pandemic. So a couple of highlights are ongoing efforts around capital project work and really kind of getting ready for the summer activity. I mentioned the Safe Routes to School project. That is on the website. We would really like resident participation. There's a survey input opportunity for residents to provide information about Edwards Elementary and safe routes to and from that school. So encourage people to provide comments. And again, that's on the website. I believe comments in a relatively short period of time. I believe we've got a June 15th deadline to submit that grant. So probably in the next few weeks would be preferable. The work on the solar farm project next to the wastewater treatment plant has started. We haven't started construction yet, but working on that project, and hopefully will be complete in July of next year. A couple things to mention in the maintenance area that have to do with people being at home and the way that our economy has slowed down. One being the fats, oils, and grease program, and seeing more businesses operating in carry out and delivery has changed some of the pickup of the grease and the collection of grease and grease traps. That has caused some downstream, pun intended, problems where we're seeing an increase of fats, oils, and grease into the wastewater collection system. So something we're trying to work with and work through, but definitely a concern of kind of the change of how life has been working. The other is one we've talked about before: save the pipes, don't flush wipes. We are continuing to see wipe bergs and all kinds of gross things from people flushing non-flushable wipes. Yeah, they're not flushable even though it's in the name. So please throw them in the trash and help us and maintenance not have to go out and get rid of that stuff. It's really gross. The facilities folks are doing a lot of projects and making sure we have PPE in our various facilities. One of the projects they're working on is the canopy in the public safety building, which will shade police vehicles. They're expecting to finish that by about June 15th. And that will actually have a great benefit for IT as well, because it will not fry the sort of IT infrastructure within those police cruisers, and should help the police function better. Maybe it'll save us some money in the process. Just a couple last quick notes. Public Works provides a lot of great statistics, so I'm going to rattle off a couple. They have, in stormwater, cleaned 5,503 feet of stormwater piping and video inspected another 4,395 feet of stormwater lines. They've swept 450 street curb miles, 450 miles. And in the process removed 22 cubic yards of debris. They have received, through a grant that they got from the state, 450-gallon fuel trailer that will help in refueling generators and our equipment. And so that should be placed into service beginning of June. And then I'm on the last page, folks. Let's see, the water treatment plant is actually seeing lower than average demand for May, at least slightly. And just an FYI for the residents that are listening, that backflow test notices went out in mid-April or mid-late April. We've only received 300 test reports out of 2,500 on the system. We're trying to provide the notice and work with people to make sure that those tests are done, not looking to be punitive, but also looking to make sure we get the information that we need. So to the extent that we can have folks testing those, that would be a good thing. And then the last thing, which is somewhat of a good news item actually, is compost. The compost program, we had Mount Everest of compost. It was ginormous if you saw any pictures of it before, and really impressive. We had to hold off on offering compost due to concerns about COVID and social distance and contact. So felt comfortable finally opening what turned out to be the floodgates of compost and to the community. Provided at this point, we're estimating we've given away 1,100 yards of compost to over 260 customers, and we still have about 1,300 remaining. So I mean, we took that giant Mount Everest pile in half. So super impressive, and I think hopefully a great service to the public. Likely we will begin to charge for compost, which is free, which may help, but we will likely start charging for compost probably in the next month, and we will provide some information about that on our website. But for those who are getting their gardens in, hopefully we were able to provide you with a wonderful batch of compost. And I made it under the wire.
Nice. Well, Dan, I could just say in 1 year and 4 months, I have never heard as detailed a city manager's report, and I am very grateful. It gives a good sense of what the city does, so thank you. Folks, let's reconvene this thing in 3 minutes. How's about that? Take a break, stretch your legs, because the next run may be a little long, so here we go. All right, let's call to order the City Council business session for Monday, May 18th. A roll call, please, Sue.
Councilor Piros,
Present.
Councilor Johnson,
Here.
Councilor Yarnell Holloman,
Here.
Councilor Martinez Plancarte,
Present.
Mayor Rogers,
Present.
Councilor Bacon,
Here.
Councilor Finley.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, all present, duly noted.
Okay, thank you very much. The Pledge of Allegiance, please, folks. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God, indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice
for all.
All right. All right, then. Well, thank you very much. Before we get into the bulk of the meeting, I just wanted to remind everyone this is, we are doing this as a video meeting. We do have a means for public comment, both as during the general comment period on items that are not on the agenda, but also then during specific items in the body of the agenda. We will limit those comments to 5 minutes. And I think Sue has the capability of giving us a timer. And when we do have public comments, I'll try to mention the starting time, and Sue will give you a minute warning when you've got a minute left in your time. But again, that only stands for public comment, not for things like presentations from Visit Newberg. So why don't we roll into that? Item 4A, Visit Newberg's quarterly report. Good evening, Leslie.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mayor Rogers and Council. I'm pleased to present to you this evening our Winter 2020 Quarterly Report, which covers the time period from January to March of 2020. Additionally, there will be a second report, which is titled "It's Not Business as Usual," and will address some of the questions and concerns that were brought up at the last council meeting. And we will start with the quarterly report, then segue to the not business as usual report. So next slide, please. Thank you. For those of you who are new to City Council, I've included our mission statement, which tasks us with attracting visitors to Newberg, ideally with overnight lodging stays, and ensuring those tourists support local businesses during their visit. We were working primarily towards that goal in January through March, but shifted to more passive strategies, which included a shift to local business and community support as COVID truly came to full force in late March. Next slide, please. As was discussed at the last meeting, we had a few new new board members who were added, and I reviewed this slide at the last meeting. So next slide, please. As a refresher, our 2019-2020 business plan outlines 4 key pillars that we would follow: build brand identity, grow leisure visitors, collaboration and marketing through community and industry partnerships, and finally, developing the group market. This quarter, our third from a reporting perspective, reflects the completion of our organizational build from an operational viewpoint. We shifted more to building our marketing platform in this last quarter. Next slide, please. So here are some of the nuts and bolts of Pillar 1, which we reviewed some at the annual business plan presentation 2 weeks ago. So building brand strategy. We finalized our brand, Taste Newberg, and related brand guidelines, logos, and assets. We transitioned to web design, which included developing web content, writing copy, assembling images, writing blog posts, and integration with Travel Oregon's content. We launched the site on March 24th and sent a related press release to over 500 media and stakeholder partners. We conducted photo shoots at the Allison and Rose Marino, and we continued to assemble our image library. It has been a little bit more challenging than normal to assemble that photo library because of the businesses being closed and just stay-at-home orders. We created our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We continued our social media campaign with Travel Dundee. And for specific campaign results of that, you can refer to this slide. So next slide, please. On this page and the next, our media mentions that the Newberg area and businesses have received. It's an excellent roundup of all the great things for tourists to see and do on their visits to Newberg and Yamhill County when the time is right. Our second business plan goal is to grow leisure visitor volume, and earned media such as the articles mentioned here are one valid and effective way to influence visitors for overnight stays in the future. I encourage you to read the articles in your leisure time, should you have any of that. Next slide, please. And this is just more of the articles, and particularly the Allison and the Oregon Truffle Festival received a pretty particular noted amount of mentions on this particular slide. Next, please. Thank you. So this chart reflects 7 years of transient lodging tax history. As you can see in the first column, we experienced a slight drop in Q1, which was July through September, and then we were flat in Q2. And then when we entered into Q3, you can see a significant drop due to COVID and the Allison closing on March 17, as well as dramatically reduced occupancies at our vacation rentals and other hotels and B&Bs. So as you look at the column to the far right, you'll see the impact that makes with a year-over-year comparison. Next slide, please. So our third business plan goal is collaboration and marketing through partnerships, and specifically community and industry partnerships. So key highlights of this in our third quarter were participation in industry association meetings, conferences, and webinars with Travel Oregon, Oregon Destination Association, Willamette Valley Wineries Association, the Oregon Wine Symposium, Oregon Wine and Tourism Marketing Conference. So it was a busy quarter for us as far as networking, education, and really being able to learn more about how we can be a most effective tourism agency. Additionally, efforts continued with the Yamhill County Tourism Partnership as far as our goal to become an official advisory committee to the county commissioners, as well as to bring off-road cycling events to the county. We scheduled an Expedia Co-op Spring ad campaign, which was to run from March 1 through May 31st in partnership with Willamette Valley Visitors Association. This was to benefit the Best Western and the Travelodge, but we had to put that on hold due to COVID. Next slide, please. So our fourth pillar is to develop the group market. We created an event planning guide for the new website and created it as a downloadable document for event planners. Our group marketing outreach has pretty much been put on hold pending COVID and the guidance of Governor Brown to limit group gatherings. So at this point, we're just maintaining ongoing dialogue with all area hotels regarding any group opportunities as they might present themselves in the future when we are allowed to bring large groups to our hotels. Next slide, please. So this revenue recap shows you our revenues and expenses from inception through March of 2020. It also lists the annual budget for comparison purposes. The budgeted TLT revenue amount that you see in the annual budget column is $800,804. You might question where those monies came from. So what that includes are startup funds of $250,000 that was paid in fiscal year 2018-2019, as well as $240,000 in carryover funds. So the balance of the revenues are from quarterly TLT payments for fiscal year 2019-2020, as well as CD investment interest. The expenses are fairly straightforward, increasing quarter by quarter as we work through full plan implementation. So as you may recall, we budgeted to have an end of fiscal year balance of approximately $240,000, which was to be split between the following 2 years of our 3-year agreement. I would be happy to answer any questions now related to this particular report.
Questions, anyone? All right, hearing none, I think we're ready for number 2.
Round 2, all right. So this report was prepared to address questions that you had at our last meeting. And before I begin, I want to let you know that there were 2 Facebook messages that were posted late last week regarding tourist-facing businesses reopening, mentioning our proximity to Portland, and that visitors were welcome. In our enthusiasm with the opening of the county, we overlooked the fact that we are surrounded by closed counties. There was a miscommunication between my marketing manager and myself about the messaging, and it got posted without appropriate edits. I just want to say I take full responsibility for this oversight on our part, and once it was brought to my attention, the posts were removed. I will be happy to address questions about this, as well as anything else in the presentation at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So for those who are new to council or city staff, I thought it might be helpful to include a page to let you know the definition of tourism, tourists, and tourism promotion as defined by the Oregon Tourism Commission. The state defines tourism as economic activity resulting from tourists. Tourists are those folks traveling for more than 50 miles or combining an overnight stay with their activity. Tourism promotion is how we can spend our portion of the TLT fund. The specific uses are outlined on this slide. There's also a link to an article that Trim and Stone wrote in 2015, which really defines how the TLT funds can or cannot be spent from a legal compliance standpoint. So thank you, Trim, and that's helpful to be able to refer to that. And I included a link to that meeting agenda that has Trim's letter to, it was actually in the graphic, I believe. And so I just thought that might be helpful information for those of you who are new to the scene. Next slide, please. Okay, So as I may not have emphasized in my annual plan presentation on May 4, Taste Newberg will follow Travel Oregon's lead with phased marketing activity based on Governor Brown's reopening timeframes. As we move from active crisis messaging to messaging for our new normal, we will need to have a well thought out plan and communication to our visitors. Willamette Valley Visitors Association has convened a Willamette Valley reopening task force, of which I am a member, along with all the other destination marketing organizations in the WAVA region, as well as Willamette Valley Wineries Association, to ensure that we coordinate marketing messaging and share best practices about our handling of reopenings and closed counties nearby. This group will meet weekly to tackle the challenges we face with having an open county while protecting our residents and workers from being exposed to visitors from high-risk counties. You know, I think that we may be the only county that is almost completely surrounded by closed counties. The messaging needs to be take care out there, discourage non-essential travel to open counties from high-risk counties, as defined by Oregon Health Authority. Communicate that our businesses are working on opening slowly and safely. Visitors need to be kind, patient, understanding, and careful. And WAVA is crafting a consolidated business pledge and signage that we hope local businesses will adopt, letting customers know how they are working to protect their staff and guests. Lodging operators in our area are close to approving the Oregon Wine Country Lodging Promise, with the goal of ensuring visitors that they are practicing consistent and safe standards. Next slide, please. So we will continue to monitor weekly perceptions, consumer attitudes, and state agency directives through the U.S. Travel Association, destination analysts, Travel Oregon, the Chamber, and others. We are crafting organic messaging that will address consumer and community concerns, getting ready for your visit when the time is right, stay home until it is safe, etc. Again, this will align with Travel Oregon's taglines where possible. When all counties are open, we will emphasize Oregonians rediscovering Oregon with inspirational travel ideas of beautiful country drives, scenery, farms, and Newberg area, in addition to our wineries, restaurants, and retailers. We will regularly consult with our public relations advisors to ensure we are taking a careful, gentle approach with all of our marketing messaging. When the time is appropriate, we will launch the Taste Newberg brand to the media, letting them know we are open for business and practicing safe standards. Next slide, please. For our midterm marketing plan, which I would consider at early stage phase 2 of reopening, we will focus our consumer outreach closer to home for road travel once all surrounding counties are open. We will continue to monitor and pivot in case it is taking longer for counties to open. We will story pitch ideas to journalists who are within a 1 to 2 hour drive. We will prepare pre-packaged story ideas, which include experiences that are possible while still being socially distanced. We will promote the reopening of the Allison on June 4 or thereabouts. Marketing messaging will continue to be based on guidance from Travel Oregon and WAVA. And once we enter into phase 3, we can hopefully resume following the annual business plan strategies that you approved on May 4. So there was a question regarding what cuts we took for this coming budget cycle. So I just wanted to kind of address that. I've outlined them in percentages on this slide. We did our best to cut G&A as much as possible, excluding payroll, and maintain as much as we can for marketing programs. With only 1.75 FTEs, we didn't feel that there was room to pare staff at this point. Next slide, please. So this slide gives a snapshot of some of the organic marketing activities we've completed since early April to foster business and community support through e-newsletters and social media. And one thing I forgot to point out on page 1 of the presentation is the link on our website that has been there since we launched the site that has a COVID resources link to a landing page that we try to update on a weekly basis to let people know, you know, just proper messaging, who's open, who's not open, what visitors can expect when they visit. Next slide, please. So this is the social media messaging that should not have been posted with its current verbiage or at this time. Again, our mistake. I promise you that I have now implemented a more stringent oversight of the messaging that will go out. Next slide, please. So lastly, I've included a letter of support from Oregon Destination Association that was provided to me for this presentation, emphasizing the value of your visitor marketing and promotion agency, Taste Newberg, in helping to lead and fill the vital role in tourism recovery for Newberg. We've laid the groundwork and asked for your continued support and confidence in letting us continue to build momentum with careful and thoughtful planning through these difficult times. And now I'm available for any questions you might have.
All right, folks, questions or comments? There you go. I think, Patrick, do I see you? There you are.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Leslie for when she found out. I sent her an email when I saw those Facebook messages. Just had some concerns about those. Her and I had a pretty robust conversation last week about the challenges that her organization face in this climate. And when I saw those, I was kind of scratching my head. So she was really responsive and took those down the minute she knew there was some concerns. So, kudos to her for that. That's pretty much all I had. Good presentation. And thanks for visiting us again, twice in a row.
All right, anyone else? Any other comments?
Me, Denise. Sorry, I don't know who you can see.
I can't necessarily see y'all, so yeah, just holler. All right, Denise.
I too was really upset about that advertising, and I'm very grateful you took it down. And seeing Newberg businesses on Portland news, well, our news too, but saying we're open was a little.
I don't know that I can hear you, Denise.
She's buffering.
I'm not sure if I'm the only one going through technological difficulties at the moment, but if you are, wave your hand so I know who's not hearing what.
I'm still here.
You're there. Jules is there.
I'm here. I'm here.
There we
Still
go.
here.
All right. Okay. Denise, you want to try again? I couldn't hear what you said.
I saw something that said Denise left.
Denise left? What?
It appeared at the top of my screen.
Really? All right.
Maybe she's restarting her.
All right. Well, let's wait for Denise. Any other questions or comments for Leslie? Anyone else?
I have one.
There we go.
Hi, thank you, Leslie. Great presentation. This is not directed at Leslie, just more a public service announcement in this vein. I just really hope that as we are in phase 1, which is super exciting, and that we all, at least on council, take a pledge to wear masks in public. And this weekend, it was great to see people out. But it was a little troubling that businesses and citizens weren't wearing masks. And I know that we don't have direct control over individuals' rights, but I hope that as a council, that we can lead by example and wear masks, because my big fear as a public health person is that we'll reopen then to close. And I know that Leslie and I have had that conversation, and I know that's others' fears too. So there's a lot of work that's happening between the chamber and Visit Newberg and small businesses to open safely, which is super commendable. But I just urge all of us to still practice safety measures so that we do contain the virus. Because quite frankly, it really is truly lives on the line. And I know from my perspective, there are a lot of people working really hard to try to keep people safe. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Leslie.
You know, one of the things that I learned from Visit McMinnville, that they coordinated their agencies between, I'm not sure of all the parties, but I know it's from the Downtown Association, the Chamber, Visit McMinnville, and MEDP, that they each took a responsibility to address whatever topic it might be of the pandemic, because everybody was getting so inundated with the same information that comes from so many various sources. And what I thought was really good was that they have appointed spokespeople in the city that the media can be referred to, because the media were crawling around on Friday like, no tomorrow. And, I think it's important that we have a unified voice from a city standpoint and from our agencies that are supporting that work. So something to think about.
No, I think it's a very good point, Leslie. And the other thing on this notion of mask, and I think it was probably on Travel Oregon. I was trying to find the Oregon Wine Country Lodging Promise, but now you said it's in the works, so that's probably why I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
But what I did find, which I thought was interesting, is you used to see or still see the signs in the stores that say no shirt, no shoes, no service, and Travel Oregon said you could add no mask, no service. And at some point, I mean, that's a local business determination, but I agree completely. And whether we like it or not, we are examples, as Elise said. So that is a responsibility. And and if again, if in these 21 days, if we don't, if we see, and somebody reminded me of this by comment, we've had 7 deaths in Yamhill County. All 7 deaths occurred here in Newberg. And if we see numbers increase, that 21 days is going to extend a lot longer. So, yeah. All right. Anything else for Leslie, folks? All right. Seeing none. Leslie, thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll get people safely here to Newberg.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening.
You as well.
All right. All right. Looks like the next on the agenda, we've got 2 proclamations, somewhat interrelated. And is your preference then that I read these? Is that how you would like this to be done? Sue or Dan or Truman or whoever?
Mayor, this is Doug. Yes, would you please read
Doug.
them?
Oh, Doug. There we go. Thank you. Of course, Doug. All right. The first one, proclamation honoring Harvey Milk. Hope will never be silent. Whereas today we honor the life and legacy of Harvey Milk, the first openly gay politician in California and a leader of the American Civil Rights Movement. And whereas Time magazine included Harvey Milk on a list titled 100 Most Important People of the 20th Century. And whereas Harvey Milk was not only an advocate for the LGBT community, but for all minorities, he believed in safe, strong neighborhoods and supported public education, affordable childcare, and equal rights for all. And whereas Harvey Milk's contribution to the cause of equality for all people has been recognized in a number of ways, including the issuance of a stamp with his picture on it, the posthumous awarding of the Medal of Freedom, and whereas Harvey Milk's work continues today through the work of the Milk Foundation founded by his nephew Stuart Milk in honor of his uncle. Whereas we honor Harvey Milk today, let us remember his words, hope will never be silent. Members of the LGBTQ community in the United States and around the world still face discrimination and violence rooted in the same hatred that Milk died fighting. They deserve hope and they cannot abide our silence. Now, therefore, it is proclaimed by the mayor and city council and on behalf of the citizens of the city of Newberg, Oregon, that we proclaim May 22nd, 2020 as Harvey Milk Day, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Newberg to be affixed on this 18th day of May 2020. So, anyway, Sue, do you need a vote on this for record, or can we do it just by a voice vote?
No, I don't need a vote.
Okay. All right. All in favor of the first proclamation, Harvey Milk Day, May 22nd, raise your left hand. and say, for aye. Opposed, same sign. Looks like it's unanimous. That passes. Harvey Milk Day, May 22nd. And the second proclamation for the evening. A proclamation recognizing June 2020 in honor of LGBTQ Pride Month. Whereas the struggle for dignity and equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning LGBTQ people is reflected in the tireless dedication of advocates and allies who strive to forge a more inclusive society. And whereas Bill Clinton on June 2nd, 2000 declared June Gay and Lesbian Pride Month to commemorate the June 1969 Stonewall Uprising in Lower Manhattan. And on June 1st, 2009, President Barack Obama expanded the commemoration further by declaring June to be Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Pride Month. And whereas June 28, 2020 marks the 16th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, which broke out following a police raid on the Stonewall Inn targeting LGBTQ patrons and other marginalized people in violation of their civil rights, leading to the birth of the gay rights movement. And whereas LGBTQ Americans, including those who live in our local communities, face discrimination simply for being who they are and for who they love, and there remains much work to extend the promise of our country to every person. And whereas the landmark Supreme Court decision of 2015 guaranteeing marriage equality in all 50 states was a historic victory for LGBTQ Americans and continues to affirm our belief that we are all more free when we are treated as equals. And now, therefore, it is proclaimed that on this 18th day of May, 2020, by the Mayor and City Council, and on behalf of the citizens of the city of Newberg, Oregon, that we proclaim the month of June 2020 as Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Questioning Pride Month, and encourage all community residents to eliminate prejudice wherever it exists and to celebrate our great diversity by taking part in community events throughout June, which focus on and celebrate our LGBTQ neighbors. Socially distancing, of course. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Newberg to be affixed on this 18th day of May, 2020. All right. All in favor of said proclamation, affirm by raising your left hand. And that's unanimous. So thank you. And thank you to the author of these fine proclamations, Doug, and whoever else contributed. It was very well written. So thank you very much. All right, moving on then, for those who were not on the line when we were doing the work session, we have heard the city manager's report. And if you missed it, tune into the video because it was very informative, or you can read the 10-page document, which explains it all. So there you go. All right, now we're on to council appointments. And these are some of my favorite times because this means we've got people that are willing to volunteer for the city of Newberg to make things run more smoothly. So I recommend the appointment of Robert Sherry to the Traffic Safety Commission for a term beginning now until December 31st, 2020. This is to fill the term of Chris Kelly, who resigned. And the recommendation is Lozelle Mathai to the Citizens Rate Review Commission for a term beginning now until June 30th, 2023. This is to fill the term of Sarah Greider, who resigned in January. This term was originally set to expire June 30th, but as this volunteer is willing, the mayor is appointing her to fill the remainder of the original term plus the next one. Let's see, other thing. Robert Sherry is a 13-year resident of Newberg. He is currently retired and would like to contribute to the community. His career entailed being the development business planner, a construction company owner, and commercial real estate. Lozelle Mathai is a resident of Newberg. She's owner of Closing Your Books, LLC, and would like to get more familiar and involved with the city. So I will entertain a motion to accept these two willing volunteers.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All right. Patrick moved, Stephanie seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by raising your left hand. And it looks to be unanimous, I think. Denise? I can't see Denise, but there it is. There it is. Now I can see you. All right. So unanimous. All right. Moving right along. If I can find my agenda. Here it is. All right. Public comment. First, item 7A, issue tracker. Dan, anything to note there?
No, I don't think so. I think we need to decide on the forum or fashion with which we will move forward the flag. You and I had talked about that, but other than that, I think we're good.
Yeah, you and I do need to talk about the flag, so we'll do that. All right, and then otherwise, Sue, do we have anyone in person who would like, or on the line who would like to make public comment?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do have one individual here at City Hall for public comment.
Okay. We are ready with again, 5 minute
Yeah,
limit.
give me just a second to bring up the timer. It's Mr. Murray.
Okay, great.
So you're on. Kind of if you stand like right over it, it helps. All right, give me just a second, sorry. Oh, there it is. Share. And go.
All right. Good evening, Council. My name is Nick Moraes, District 5 resident of Newberg. I just wanted to talk to you guys just a little bit about the statewide closure and city closures. And I prepared a statement that I believe Sue has given you in your packet, but I would like to read it into record if you don't mind. I have written it to all the commissioners, the councilors, and also city staff, so I'll start now if you don't mind. Dear commissioners, councilors, and city staff, I want to thank you for your service and dedication to our communities. During the COVID-19 outbreak, we have seen current restrictions in Oregon becoming more and more unconstitutional. Do you have a copy of this? I'm sorry, mine's not cut off. Excuse me, guys, I'm experiencing technical difficulties.
I didn't print it out, Nick, but what I can do is pull it up on my screen. Do you have it in your email? Okay.
I'm sorry, guys. I'll get it to you here in just 1 second. Okay, I'll continue. I apologize. So I want to thank you for your service and dedication to our communities. During the COVID-19 outbreak, we have seen current restrictions in Oregon becoming more and more unconstitutional, violating our inalienable rights and orders from Governor Brown ignoring the democratic systems we have used for 2 centuries. Because of this violation of both our Constitution and the abuse of power being exercised, the people have felt they are left without a voice to represent them. To those of you refusing to act under these constitutional violations, I commend you and honor you, and I appreciate the integrity with which you serve. We the people ask you to continue to protect our rights and take a stand for what this country was founded on, our freedom. Our Oregon Constitution states, Section 1, natural rights inherent in people. We declare that all men, when they form a social compact, are equal in right, that all power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. And they have at all times a right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. Section 2, freedom of worship. All men shall be secure in the national right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own consciousness. Section 3, freedom of religion opinion. No law shall in any case whatever control the free exercise and enjoyment of religious opinions or interfere with the rights of conscience. Oregon Constitution, Section 10A, Section 1. Definitions. Declaration of catastrophic disaster, convening of legislative assembly. As used in this article, catastrophic disaster means a natural or human-caused event, results in extraordinary levels of death, injury, property damage, or disruption of daily life in this state, and severely affects the population, infrastructure, environment, economy, or government functioning of this state. As used in this article, catastrophic disaster includes, but is not limited to, any of the following events in the event meets the criteria listed in subsection 1 of this section. A, act of terrorism. B, earthquake. C, flood. D, public health emergency. E, tsunami. F, volcanic eruption. G, war. The governor may invoke the provisions of this article if the governor finds and declares that catastrophic disaster has occurred, a finding required by this subsection shall specify the nature of the catastrophic disaster. At the time the governor invokes a provision of this article under subsection 3 of this section, the governor shall issue a proclamation convening the legislative assembly under section 12, article 5 of this constitution, unless the legislative assembly is in session at the time the catastrophic disaster is declared, or the legislative assembly is secured to convene in regular session within 30 days after the date of catastrophic disaster is declared. If the governor declares that a catastrophic disaster has occurred, the governor shall manage the immediate response to the disaster. The actions of the legislative assembly under sections 3 and 4 of this article are limited to actions necessary to implement the governor's immediate response to the disaster and to actions necessary to aid recovery from the disaster. Section 2, additional powers of the government, use of general fund monies and lottery funds. If the governor declares that a catastrophic disaster has occurred, the governor may use monies appropriated from the general fund to executive agencies for the current biennium to respond to the catastrophic disaster, regardless of the legislatively express purpose of the appropriation at the time the appropriation was made. Use lottery funds allocated to executive agencies for the current biennium to respond to the catastrophic disaster, regardless of the legislative express purpose of the allocation at the time the allocation was made. The governor may not reallocate lottery funds under this paragraph for purposes not authorized by section 4, article 15 of the Constitution. The authority granted to the governor may
Nick,
by
that's
this section
5
terminate.
minutes. So if you could wrap it up, that is 5 minutes. Thanks.
I will, in closing, to those who have felt conflicted about their duty, be it to their governor, their county, or the people, I ask you to continue to expand upon your perspective and think of the unintended consequences these restrictions are having on the United States, or on the citizens of our county. Both the constitutional attorneys and the U.S. Attorney General have reviewed these restrictions carefully, and I encourage you to also carefully consider your decisions regarding the enforcement of current orders. Maintaining a lockdown for an indefinite period of time can no longer be deemed a narrowly tailored solution to achieve the compelling government interest of public health. I know this is it's really not a difficult decision. If Oregonians can be trusted to maintain safe distance while at grocery stores, post offices, and liquor stores, they should also be entrusted to exercise, pray, and work at their small businesses using their own best judgment. In closing, I ask that you formally speak on this matter, and I respectfully request a public statement which aligns with both the spirit and letter of the documents on which this country and state are founded, from you and the governor and the people, and especially in light of the current injunction that was granted to the citizens of Oregon this afternoon.
All right.
And I'll take any questions if you have.
Thank you very much. All right, Sue, anyone else for public comment on the line or in person?
Mr. Mayor, I have received an email comment, but it's for the next item 8A on Elliott Road. I have not received any other general public comment for number 7.
Okay, well, great. All right, then, given that, let's move on to item 8A, Resolution 2020-3666, a resolution selecting a preferred alternative and authorizing the acquisition of right-of-way and easements for the North Elliott Road sidewalks and bike lane project.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. So Tony Roos from Kittleson and Associates and I will be presenting information tonight on the Elliott Road Sidewalks and Bike Lanes project. Unfortunately, Paul Chu, who has been the project manager on this project, is out on extended family leave. Otherwise, he would be here tonight. So want to let you know that piece of the puzzle. This is an exciting project that will improve multimodal transportation for the entire community. Next slide, please. So the proposed project is to construct sidewalks from 99W to the high school and bike lanes from 2nd Street north to the high school. This project will increase the safety and mobility of all roadway users. The project will also include storm drainage to resolve the existing ponding flooding issues and streetlights to improve safety. Next slide, please. So this proposed project meets the 2019 Community Vision Plan's livability and development goals of creating accessible sidewalks on primary critical routes, completing bike lanes and lane treatments along routes established by the City Council, and is consistent with the City Council's goals of developing an operational culture that adopts and cherishes diversity, equity, and inclusion. It also meets the requirements of our ADA pedestrian plan, which is installing sidewalks along all primary critical routes. Not all residents drive, and everyone benefits from a street where it's safe for all people, regardless of age or ability to get around. All collectors within the city are prioritized to construct improvements to meet city standards. Elliott Road has been on the capital improvement program for several years. Once Villa Road was completed, Elliott Road became the next highest priority, as it's in proximity to several schools, a large residential neighborhood, and the pool. The Transportation System Plan, which was last adopted in 2016, classifies Elliott Road as a major collector. I will note that Elliott Road's been classified as a collector since the 70s. As one of only 3 signalized intersections on 99W, for this neighborhood, Elliott Road's designation as a major collector is appropriate. Safe pedestrian and bicycle facilities are required on major collectors per the city's transportation system plan, the development code, and design standards. In addition, the Oregon legislature passed the bike bill in 1971, which requires facilities for people walking and biking wherever a road, street, or highway is built or rebuilt. It applies to ODOT cities and counties and requires spending reasonable amounts of their share of the state highway fund, which is actually designated as 1%, on facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists. These facilities must be located within the right-of-way of public roads, streets, or highways, and that are open to motor vehicle traffic. Next slide, please. So public outreach, there have been multiple official public outreaches, including several neighborhood walking tours, an open house, a council presentation. On top of those official public outreach events, there have been multiple additional emails, phone calls, and meetings with the neighbors, with both Tony Roos and Paul Chu. And I know, Mayor, you have attended several also with neighbors out in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. Well, we heard at some of these events that most people widely support sidewalks along the entire corridor. They desire traffic safety and calming, reduced speeding. They are concerned about the variety of lane widths and don't want the travel lanes to get wider. Many supported bicycle facilities. They want to save trees. Concerns about property impacts. Concerns about on-street parking, both for and against. And then they're also concerned about drainage problems that are been identified by the residents. Next slide, please.
So after our initial neighborhood walkabout and topographic survey, we created multiple alternative cross sections for the widening of the road. The first alternative is the city's standard typical section. That's the one on the left. And it has five foot sidewalks, a landscape strip, a 5 foot or 6 foot bicycle lane on street, and 2 12-foot travel lanes, 1 lane each direction. We then looked at options to reallocate that lane space or change some of the dynamics to best fit the texture, the context of the roadway. And the first option we came with was to raise the bike lane. It was a raised cycle track. And that takes the bike lane, the same 6 foot bike lane, and just lifts it up 4 inches and builds it out of concrete. Option 3 we looked at is a buffered bike lane. And this takes a foot of width from the travel lane and puts a second stripe next to the bike lane, gives it a buffer between the vehicle and the bicyclist. Same width as your major collect, as a city standard typical section. From there, we went a little outside the box, and these next 4 options wouldn't be approvable under the current city development code. But option 4 would take the bicycle lane and put it next to the sidewalk. And this puts the bicyclist next to the pedestrian and puts a landscape strip between the pedestrian and bicyclist and the heavier cars. Option 5 we thought of was a shared use path on one side of the road or the other. And that would have to be at least 16 feet wide to have two-way bicycle traffic and a pedestrian. And then we'd still put a sidewalk on the other side. We didn't look to see which way this would fit, putting the shared use path on the west side or the east side. It's just a concept to see if it would fly. The 6th option we looked at is, what does it look like for the roadway if we narrow this down to absolute minimums? And usually we don't go to absolute minimums across the board for every element. You look at reducing single elements, but not all of them all the time. So we looked at it and said, what if we reduce it completely down and do a 5.5-foot sidewalk, do a small landscape strip, anything smaller than 4 feet, street trees aren't going to be happy. Went with a 5.5-foot bike lane, 10-foot travel lanes, and came out to a 50-foot right-of-way. So once we created the alternatives, we developed some thought of how do we evaluate these to get to a staff preferred alternative or recommended alternative for council to select a preferred alternative. And we started with, would it be allowed by code? And talking with the planning team is that options 4, 5, and 6 would require a change to the development code to implement those. The fear being that if we allowed it for Elliott, all other future developments happening in the city would try to do the same thing. And thereby it wouldn't be a standard anymore. So we're trying to implement and maintain the standard. So then we looked at the costs of the 3, 1, 2, and 3, and 1 and 3, roughly the same cost. Number 2, the raised cycle track, the benefit that it has when you start jumping up and down for driveways, it really goes away. The effect of it goes away. So we narrowed it down to to options 1, the typical section, and option 3. In between there, we also looked at options for putting the sidewalks on one side of the road or the other, and just building half the street. That option really didn't gain a lot of traction with us because it's picking favorites. One side of the road would still have to cross the street in an unsafe, unprotected location, and you wouldn't have full connectivity from both sides of the road. So which side do you put that on? It really didn't seem like there was a good spot to just pick one side or the other. Was a doing both or not at all kind of situation. So between options 1 and 3, the buffered bike lane or the city standard typical section, next slide please. It really boiled down to a pedestrian level of stress and a bicycle level of stress analysis. And this is from the Oregon Highway Plan, where they've developed this alternative analysis for bicyclists to look at what is it convenient for a bicyclist or comfortable for bicyclists. And they put bicyclists into 4 big categories. The top 2 are your really strong, confident bicyclists. They're the ones that are going to ride on the roadway, whether there's a facility or not. The middle section, which is the bulk of bicyclists in the US, are interest but concerned. It is your young teenagers, families that will ride on a facility if it appears and feels safe to them, low stress. So to determine if a bicycle facility is low stress, we look at the volume on the road, and Elliott has 3,000 cars a day. vehicle speeds. If we implement the curb extensions, the bulb outs, we expect traffic to get down back to the 25 miles an hour it's supposed to be driving. Right now it's at 28 with a few outliers at 50, 1 or 2 outliers, and it's usually when school's in session. And the width of the bike lane. So if we do the buffered bike lane, we do the slower speeds, we can get a bicycle level of stress of 1 with that 7-foot bike lane, buffered bike lane. 1 being the best, 4 being option 6, where it's a very narrow, right next to the roadway. Then we looked at the pedestrian level of stress, and it's based on the sidewalk width, the presence of the landscape strip between the vehicles and the sidewalk, and the width of the sidewalk. So if you have a 6-foot sidewalk, your pedestrian level of stress is 1. So that means somebody in a wheelchair and a pedestrian can pass each other without anybody having to step off into the side or into the shoulder of the road. So that leads us to, actually, Karin, can we get the next one? Next slide, please.
So some additional considerations that we looked at is that there was a question about the commercial development and the traffic there and whether or not it's safe or not. We did a traffic study. It's 48-hour count during the weekday, so it was prior to COVID and it was during the school year. And there was really only 3 cars that were waiting to turn into the commercial development at any one time. So really no safety or queuing issues that were found. And another thing that was brought up was trees. We did complete an arborist study. The plan is to save the sequoia tree at the corner of 99W and Elliott Road. And also save other trees where we can, where it makes sense throughout the roadway and the project. We will be undergrounding utilities as part of this project, and that provides for a safer, more reliable system. This will cause temporary impacts to 10 properties that are currently served by overhead utilities. Another thing to note is that the school district is in support of this project. They did submit a letter, I believe that went out in your packet on Friday. So that's a plus. And then another quick information is that we received statewide, or actually countrywide, that sidewalks add about $82 a square foot to the value of your home. So when you add the sidewalk in, it actually allows for increased value. So the next slide, please. So based on all the feedback that we've received, staff's recommendation is to build a buffered bike lane alternative. And because the current situation really isn't safe. The fact that there hasn't been an accident out here is by luck, not by design. The preferred alternative provides for narrower travel lanes, buffered bike lanes, wider sidewalks, and planter strips. In order to save healthy trees, we're going to move the sidewalk curb tight and install curb extensions and bulb outs at intersections to provide traffic calming and additional safety. The preferred alternative does not allow parking on the street. That has been a concern that has been brought up. But again, as the collector street, parking is not allowed with a bike lane. If you did want to allow for parking on the street also, that would mean that the street would need to get between 16 to 20 feet wider, which could be a challenge, obviously, in this location. The alternative that we are proposing does require buying right-of-way from 5 properties out of the 40 along this corridor. So the rest of the properties along this corridor have already, the right-of-way has already been dedicated, so there would be no need to buy additional property from them. And next slide, please.
So to help visualize what the project looks like, we understand that everybody's an engineer and we see things in 2D, but so we created a 3D rendering for the preferred alternative and what it could look like when it's done. So the two images you see are at Norwood and at Hallworth. And Sue, if you can run the video.
No pressure, Sue, but the entire world's waiting for you.
Rick, I'm having a little trouble with the video getting started, so I'm trying to stop it and start it on the website. Give me just a second. Sorry.
No worries, no worries.
While Sue's doing that, I will note that I do know that Mrs. Crockett is on the line and she's got a question she's going to want answered. And we can bring that up at the end, just a note on that.
Yeah, and I think so we've got Brandy Crockett, I think Dan DeHaan, somebody potentially from Tyler Smith and Associates, I believe potentially Nick Moraes, and Merrill Kunkel, if I've got the queue figured out, so.
So this video is on the city's website, and this is a visual simulation. So the houses we've closely approximated. They're not exact models of the homes, but they're in the right location. And you start at the high school, and you're seeing a wipe through of the proposed improvements over the existing as it goes down towards 99W. You'll note that the sidewalk is roughly in the same spot where sidewalk does exist today. Now we're going to start at 99 and fly through the corridor. Give you a bird's eye view that drops down about the height of a car. Pause is unintentional, so this is a nice little spot to. So you'll see the buffered bike lane. You'll see where we moved the sidewalk curb tight to minimize right-of-way impacts and save big trees. This is where bikes and peds come together to go through these the curb extensions. You see how the bikes interact with pedestrians, and then they roll back down to being on street for the buffered bike lane. And then they roll up again, merge, and then come across the road. The bike lane and the sidewalk would have a different textured treatment, so they wouldn't be the same concrete, so you'd be a visual break of where those two lines are. And my creative guy put the tiger prints back on the roadway, if you didn't catch that. You'll also see street lights along the entire corridor, and then the transition into the high school, still a work in progress, working with the school district. So that video is on there. You probably, if you want to jump into on your free time and watch it again, a little more bandwidth.
Okay, next slide, please. Sue gets this one down. So the next steps in this project are really for the council to decide on a preferred alternative. Once that alternative is decided, that we would complete design. We would begin right-of-way acquisition where needed. Construction would begin spring of 2021 would be the earliest through the next summer. And in the meantime, there would be additional public outreach. So do we have any questions, thoughts, concerns at this point in time?
I have a couple questions, Rick. Mayor.
If you can go to the next slide, please, just so. Sorry, I'm ready for the questions now.
Oh, I wasn't sure you heard me because I was having trouble communicating earlier. One, how much time was spent with the homeowners prior to these sketches being done?
There were actually 2 different walkthroughs with the homeowners, one in the middle of the day and one in the evening, different rounds. And then there was actually other individual emails and phone calls and meetings with those homeowners. I can't give you an exact number of hours, but there were certainly several of those meetings before the sketches were put together.
Okay. And then I do completely understand their parking concerns, and the comment that we can't make code variances because then we'll have to do it for everyone kind of disturbs me. And let me tell you why. You know, these are old neighborhoods, new rules, square pegs, round holes. No problem is ever going to be the same in every neighborhood. And I think, you know, that's why we do code variances, is giving people that opportunity to make what's already there fit everyone's needs. If you're going to build a new neighborhood, absolutely, right? Those are the rules. But I get a little concerned with that kind of rigid thinking, because I think it's a little dangerous, and it's a little not fair too, because every situation's different. And that's all I have.
Anyone else? Other questions or comments?
Oh, Rick, you can always count on me for a few.
There
right?
you go. There you go.
Karn, just to get a sense, how long has this project been on the transportation system plan? Do you know that off the top of your head?
The project's been in the plan since the 1970s. It has been actively in the capital improvement program for at least 5 years, if not longer than that.
And then I have a follow-on, if I might, Mr. Mayor. How do we prioritize what's in the CIP for any given year versus other projects? Because I know there are other projects out there, you know, that are near and dear to my heart. And I'm just curious, is that something that staff handles, or is that something that comes to council and we kind of prioritize stuff? Explain that process to me.
Yeah, so it starts with staff. We are the ones that put together the capital improvement program. We look at a variety of things, obviously cost, how much money we have available, what all of the other projects may be, trying to make them all work together, water, sewer, transportation. And then on the transportation side in particular, we start to look at, again, where are the critical routes? Where do we have ADA issues? Where do we have vulnerable populations, people walking to the high school? You know, we're working on the Safe Routes to School at Edwards Elementary, where excuse me, we'll be adding sidewalks in those locations also. So it's a variety of things. We do bring that capital improvement program to the council for the council to listen and provide any feedback that they may have on it. The one thing I will say is that after Elliott Road, the next projects on the list are Main Street, north of 240, and Mountain View Drive is another big one that we've heard concerns about. And I will note, Councilor Bacon, I understood your concern. The problem we have is that most of our collector streets are in older neighborhoods, and to put bike lanes and sidewalks in means that we're doing the same things in those locations, or we're varying all of them every time we come, which we can do that too, but it's just something to think about. When I think about Main Street, Winooski, River Road, Villa Road, all of those have the same issues where we put bike lanes in, we're going to lose parking, on-street parking that has been there. When we add sidewalks, we will be changing the look of the street. So those are going to be on all of the streets as we move forward. So.
I had another question, if I might, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Hey, respecting the authority, I see here that the storm fund is part of the funding source for this project, and you're leveraging both storm water improvement funds as well as transportation improvement funds. I was curious, what are some of the storm issues out there? I know we've heard some of them before, but how are those systemic, and have they been out there for years and years and years? Or kind of talk to me a little bit about the storm situation out there, stormwater situation.
Yeah, the storm situation has been out there for years. There's actual flooding and ponding that happens along the backside of the properties there along Elliott Road, and also along the roadway itself. There's no storm drainage system in Elliott other than the ditches really at the north end between the high school and Hayworth, kind of. There's some ditches there. But south of that, there is nothing. So the water just kind of runs off where it may. And so this would be installing storm lines in the street to take that water off, and would also be treating a bunch of the storm water from the roadway and also from the high school, actually. We're looking at both of those pieces of the puzzle. So yeah, the storm drainage has been an issue out here for quite a while, and so this project will also address that.
And Karn, the main north of 240 and the Mountain View Drive projects, would they also be able to leverage other types of funds, or would those just be mainly street funds?
Mountain View Drive would mainly be street funds. And we would be putting some water lines in if we were going to actually build a portion of it. But Main Street, most of those utilities are actually in the ground, so it would be mainly just the road project itself.
Okay, and I'm going to pause. I have more, but I want to give other people an opportunity, so I'm going to pause. And
all right. Other questions, comments?
Yeah. Could I speak, Mayor?
Sure.
Being the representative of District 5, I have listened to and heard and read the voices of the people who are living on that street. It makes it a difficult decision, but this actually affects more, this road affects more than the citizens of Elliott Road. And the safety of all the citizens that use this road in different manners is my concern. I don't understand why this wasn't done years ago, but I am thankful that there have been no serious accidents yet. But as Karen said, that's not by design, but by fate.
All right. Anyone else? We'll circle back, but why don't we go to public comment? And let's see. I will start just with the list that I have, if we can do that soon, and see how this will work. Let's start with Mr. Dan DeHaan.
Mayor, give me just a second, because I got to bring up timer tools and I got to unmute Mr. DeHaan so he can talk, okay?
And while you're doing that, I will remind all the folks of public comment that, this is a period, 5 minutes per person. It'd be good if we hear different views and not too repetitive. And then also remember, and I think Mrs. Crockett particularly has a question. Go ahead and ask it, but let's not get to the back and forth exchange during public comment. We'll ask one of the counselors or myself to ask the question of staff. If we could do that, that would be wonderful.
Maybe it does it on the online.
It does it through the Zoom.
Okay.
All right, we can hear somebody. Is that you, Mr. DeHaan?
Am I unmuted?
I believe
You are,
so.
sorry.
Okay. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, so if I could jump in, please, I'd like to mention that thank you guys all for taking the time to listen. A little over 2 years ago, back in March of 2018, I met with Bob Andrews, the mayor. I expressed concern.
Hey, finally worked.
Is it working? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, 2.5 years ago, met with Bob Andrews back in March 8th, 2018, to talk about Elliott Road concerns. During the course of that discussion, part of it had to do with the fact that the road had been recently repaved and that there were ADA sidewalk improvements that were slated to be done on the east side. Those have all been done. We got a beautiful road, beautiful sidewalks on that side. Moving forward, specifically the bike lanes and the green space, they're simply not necessary. They would go nowhere, I would argue. Hayworth cannot be further improved this way, meaning that these bike lanes are not going to connect anything on Hayworth. With Hayworth, you're riding your bicycle on the street. So, and I would also mention that the traffic coming up from 99, meaning the pedestrian or bicycle traffic from that direction, is virtually non-existent. As you cross 99 or on South Elliott, there's no residential there. So the point of all my dialogue here is that all this talk about the safety for the pedestrians and the bicycles and how safe they feel, even if we only have 3 pedestrians a day and 3 bicyclists, I agree we need to make them safe, but not at the cost that we're currently talking about. The current plan eliminates all the street parking, We would have no place to park our current vehicles in the driveways, let alone inviting guests over for a holiday dinner. I mean, are you suggesting that we use the non-existent Panda Express parking? So I don't want to be critical, but there are historic plants and trees along this area, and they're going to be adversely affected by this widening. You cannot guarantee that they're not going to be affected. And moreover, again, the whole concept of we're going to take away green space, we're going to take away real estate from the property owners to turn it back into a green space. I'm just in fundamental disagreement here with this. Currently, the apartments in Panda Express and Starbucks, they don't have adequate parking. And this is due to oversight from the city's engineering, allowing them to overdevelop that whole complex. So are you suggesting again that we park in the couple of cul-de-sacs that are going to be left over? It's really going to leave next to nothing. The main entrance to the high school and to the 2 other schools is not Elliott Road. Do we have some traffic? Of course, but mostly because of the poor judgment that was exercised in the development of the Panda Express and Starbucks. In stark contrast to what's now been stated about, oh, it's been fate. Gene Spiros, you had the audacity to say it's fate that we haven't had an accident. And Karen, I believe you indicated as well, it's sheer luck. No, I would not agree with that. We've had high school and pedestrian and vehicle traffic there for 50 years, and this street has no history of any routine accidents due to these kind of situations. With respect to this whole project, and again, in stark contrast to what was stated about the public comment, that is not true. The dates you articulated about the different walk through the neighborhoods, the afternoon one, the evening one, all true statements. But the bottom line is that none of the information that was shared by the public was taken into consideration. The engineers have gone about engineering streets in the same old way. So I'm not sure what to say other than that the community, meaning the neighbors, did not have a chance to input. Rather, they shared their input, but it was completely falling on deaf ears. So with respect to a community survey, I'm going to take a step back or take a page from the water system that was being discussed earlier and the backup water supply system. A community survey was done. Why was one not done for this street? I will also mention that we started a survey, a very informal one, 72 hours ago. The majority of these people are asking, why on earth are we going to spend $3.5 million, you know, to improve this road? There's other roads that need the work, you know. Jules, you've talked about needing money for, you know, Latino families. You know, I think we have about $3 million we could use here if we spend about $500,000 on some sidewalks and call this street good. Am I suggesting sidewalks alone? No, but let's go to the drawing board with some participation from the neighbors here. So I'm not sure what else to talk about other than I believe that there's some inaccurate statements and exaggerations regarding connecting bike paths. You're not connecting to anything. The bike traffic and the pedestrian traffic coming up Elliott Road northbound from 99 is virtually non-existent. So the public outreach again was, you know, you've indicated dates and times, you've sent out postcards, but it's really not there, the public outreach. So yeah, and again, the pedestrian and bicycle levels that you've spoken of in terms of traffic are just simply not there. We don't have it. So respectfully, I guess that's my concluding comments here.
All right, Mr. DeHunt, you know, thank you very much for your time. Next on my list anyway is Brandy Crockett, please.
Hi there, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Hi. So I have similar questions. I know you said not to make them redundant, but my question is more about the continuation of the bike lanes. I know from what I guess I've been told through emails from the city is that Haworth is a standard major collector and so is Deborah as well. They currently both have, well, actually just Haworth has like the painted bicycle signs on it on the road, but there's no bike lanes. There's parking on both sides. And then I know that on Villa, you guys redid that road and made it into bike lanes. And there's bike lanes on 99. There's bike lanes south of 99 on Elliott Road. If you continued it on into the high school, it would dead end there. But if you guys don't have the bike lanes go out further, like onto Deborah where the elementary school's at, where I would actually envision seeing more biking because kids don't drive. Like, I'm just trying to figure out, is there a plan to turn Haworth into a true standard major collector and have bike lanes on there and then into Deborah? Because otherwise they're really, I'm just having a hard time understanding the purpose of the bike lanes if they don't go anywhere. I know that they go to the senior parking lot, but I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'm here all the time. There really isn't a significant amount of bikers that are kids on our road. Every now and then you'll see an adult bike down our road, but it's not significant. And most of the time when the weather's bad, there's nobody ever. And sometimes you see people maybe a couple a week. So I'm just trying to figure out what's the purpose, because I bike sometimes, but I'm trying to figure out what would you do to make the bike lanes actually functional because they don't go anywhere right now. So what's the purpose of building the bike lanes on Elliott Road, cutting into people's property, widening the road, the row of the road, for like not hardly anybody biking on the road. So I guess that's my question is more just like, what's the purpose of it if it's not going to extend out? Or is there a plan to turn the other standard major collectors into true standard major collectors, take away parking on those roads, and make it into like this continuation bike route through Newberg type thing? So that was just kind of my concern. My concern is really, what is the purpose of the bike lane if it just dead ends at the senior parking lot where most seniors are driving or hitching rides with their senior friends? So if I don't know if that can be answered now or not, but kind of, will it extend out? And that's all.
All right, Ms. Crockett, thank you. Thank you very much. And we will ask the question during the next phase of deliberation for Karen and Tony. So hang tight if you can, and we'll get back to your question. Is there anyone from Tyler Smith and Associates on the line? I'm not hearing anyone. What about, is Nick Moraes on the line?
I had seen Tyler on earlier, but I'm not seeing him on now. I'll keep looking. Mr. Moraes is here in person, so he can go ahead and start, and then I'll look for Mr. Smith and see if I can't locate him on the participant list.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Moraes.
Sorry.
Okay, thanks, guys. First of all, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for letting me go over on my time in the previous segment. I know that's frowned upon, and I didn't quite get through my statement, but I appreciate you letting me talk. I won't speak too much on this, just because everyone has said pretty much what needs to be said. I do appreciate Councilor Bacon, your comments. That's what I was going to talk about specifically, but I don't need to rehash that. And also, Councilor Johnson, I appreciate your questions, and I hope you have more, just so you guys can better understand what's going on this road. I don't live on Elliott. I live next to it. I live on Oak Drive. I know many of the residents there, and I'm in constant contact with them, just as a resident, and I want to know what's going on in my district. One thing that concerns me is every time the city talks about this project, they keep saying the public wants this, the public wants that, and I'm speaking directly to the residents on Elliott Road, and they disagree with your conclusions on what the public wants. I don't really know where the disconnect is. It's concerning to me. It's concerning to a lot of people, especially on that road. Everyone I've talked to, and I've talked to probably 20 to 25 of the residents that live on Elliott Road, they're all in agreement. Sidewalks are a really good deal. They want continuous sidewalks on the east and west side. They think that'd be great, but there really isn't any need to widen the roads and take people's property. It's just really not necessary, especially due to the landscape, as Councilor Bacon was talking about. I mean, that neighborhood it's been here since the beginning, and to disrupt that and to change the whole landscape of the road, it really detracts from everyone there. They moved there for a reason. They like their big lots, they like their big yards, and I just don't understand why the city seems that it wants to take that away from them, and in the name of quote unquote safety. It's kind of the tired excuse of, save the kids, and it doesn't make sense. The data's not there. For people that live there, they see it every single day. So we have people that don't live on Elliott Road making lateral decisions on what the road should look like and telling the residents on what the road is, and it just really doesn't make sense to me. So I really wish that, all that said, I do appreciate the work that the city engineers have done and the project manager. They have reached out, and I think it's great. I've been to most of the meetings, and I think they've done a really, really good job of reaching out to the public. It's probably the best I've seen yet. But the problem is what I'm hearing from the public that is being told to them, it doesn't correlate to the projects that the council's seeing. So they keep saying the public wants this, the public wants this, and well, quite frankly, that isn't true. So really, all I have to say is I really hope the disconnect can be fixed, and that we can really focus on what needs to be done there on a small scale, just to not ruin the old feel of Newberg. I mean, that road it's classic, and now we have a house there that's going to be in the historical society. And I mean, that's awesome. I mean, that in and of itself, you should leave that road alone. Just make it safe, like everyone wants. Put the sidewalks in. That's great, but leave it alone. I mean, there's no data that says that needs to be wider and bike lanes and all this stuff. The data isn't there. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right, Mr. Moraes, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for your graciousness on the last round of public comment. Sue, have we found or seen Tyler Smith and Associates?
I found him. So do you want him next? And then I have Merrill Kunkel
Right.
too, signed up to speak.
Yep.
So Mr. Smith next?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Smith, are you ready?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, city councilors. My name is Tyler Smith. I'm an attorney with Tyler Smith and Associates. Our law firm has been retained to represent a handful of the property owners on Elliott Road, 3 specifically at this time. And I would point out, Mr. Mayor, that we've notified the city since at least October of 2019 that we represent these 3 property owners. We have not met with any of the city officials. We've had a couple of phone conversations and conversations to potentially meet, but those have not happened. And Mr. DeHaant's specific references to, we're surprised to hear this plan come out in a postcard, probably references that we had expected to meet and talk with city officials before an option was selected to hear and go over our concerns, both practical and legal. One of the things that I'd like to point out for the council's consideration with the specific alternative that's being selected, you'll notice that it's a 24-foot road, yet we have now a 60-foot easement being acquired. You have 36 feet of non-road usage when it's only a 24-foot road. This is going to take property from Mr. Jane's apartment complex, affect all of the apartments that are in his apartment complex. This is going to affect Mr. Aviolo's driveway and Mr. DeHaant's property. They are not willing to sell this property to the city. And if you heard your staff report, I think it might be wise to take note to the fact that their rationale for not selecting only one side to do this expansion, bike lanes or walkways that they'd like, was simply that they didn't want to pick a side where one side gets the benefit and one side gets the detriment. However, so does it make logical sense to you as city councilors to anger twice as many people or half as many people? If you have to do this, you should at least select an alternative that only does half of the road. That's plenty safe. You have the same ability to walk or bike on one side of the road, and you have at least only half of the expense. Condemnation proceedings that are going to have to take place here pay a lot of attorney's fees, take a lot of time, and you have unwilling participants where you're going to have to use your powers to take their property away and violate their constitutional rights and pay them. So I would encourage you to reopen the doors to conversation, have your staff actually meet with council, reconsider options that consider one side of the road that leaves some parking along this street. If you don't leave some parking on the street, you're going to run into overflowing driveways. You're going to run into people backing into bicyclists and pedestrians more than they would otherwise. So I think it's time to reconsider, and I would ask you to table this and send it back to the drawing board a little bit for further consideration.
All right, Mr. Smith, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments and your time. Merrill Kunkel, please.
Hello?
Merrill?
Yes.
Okay, we got Merrill. I'll start the timer.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Hello, councilors, mayor, and everybody else. I am a resident that lives off of Elliott Road. I live in Redwood Court, and which is right off of Elliott. And I would like to express my support and continued support of the project moving forward. Although the road is short, it is a major thoroughfare and does need serious improvement in order to keep our youth and residents safe. Many times I have seen people just walking on the road because there are no sidewalks. And as a mom of young children, my kids are definitely unsafe when they're in the area walking around. I've heard many concerns about the plans to improve the road, suggesting that widening it would increase the speed at which people travel. But I would suggest that folks already travel too fast down the road, and the creative use of landscaping and greenery, as well as modified intersections, will help curb the speed of vehicles as much as possible. In looking at alternate cross sections, I preferred a shared use path or what was suggested, which is the buffered bike lane. It would keep the shared use path would keep the actual width to a minimum and would also keep bicycles and pedestrians buffered away from vehicles with the use of the landscaping. Since this is a road used widely by our youth, keeping bicycles off the roads and utilizing a shared use path would seem to be the safest option in my opinion. But after looking at the conceptual design, it seems as though many of the concerns of folks living on or near Elliott Road have been taken into consideration and changes have been made in order to accommodate us as much as possible. I have neighbors who have expressed concern about widening and altering the road as they would lose yard space. But from the design, it looks as though the design team, Paul and the team, have taken them into account and kept much of their yard as their landscaping green space in order to accommodate them. There are also parts of the road at the Hayworth intersection and near the high school that have utilized the idea of the shared use path option to keep the bicycles off the road. Given this, I believe that the plan is a good compromise between all of the residents' concerns, and I'd like to express my support for the project to move ahead. I appreciate Mr. Moraes' comments, but I haven't spoken to him and some of my other neighbors, and there is wide support for this road to be updated for the safety, as it is a thoroughfare for youth and residents to the 3 schools right in the area. So yeah, I would just like to express my support for the project to keep moving ahead. Thank you very much for my time.
All right, Ms. Kunkel, thank you. Thank you very much. Sue, do we have any, so we have a couple of written comments I understand that are in the packet. Do we have anyone else waiting to speak?
No, Mr. Mayor, I have not received any emails during the meeting, and Mr. Moraes is the only one physically present here.
Okay. Council, what's your pleasure on whether we read the notes into the record or not? You've got them in your packet. Would you like me to read them for the record? Anyone? All right. Given that, you don't get to hear me read again. So there are I can summarize one regarding the question of parking, I believe particularly on the east side of the street. And then the other was a letter of support from the school district supporting the idea of both bike paths and sidewalks and all of the work that's proposed. So, all right, let's go now into discussion. Deliberation, public comment is now closed. Let's move into, let's start with Karen, if we could. Let's start with the question of what are the plans for bike paths that Ms. Crockett asked, in connectivity in that area.
So, Mr. Mayor, yeah, we have an entire bike plan throughout the city that has been adopted by council and been incorporated into our transportation system plan. So this is not the first street that we're putting bike lanes on, and it certainly won't be the last, but unfortunately, because we have so many streets that don't have those bike lanes on it, it's going to take time. And so we just have to do it one project at a time. So yes, eventually the bike lanes will go all the way north. Hayworth will have, Hayworth is actually a minor collector rather than a major collector, so it has shared use on that roadway for those types of things. Springbrook Road will have sidewalks or bike lanes. Bike lanes and sidewalks here will connect over to Hayworth down to Springbrook to get you to the golf course and the paths through there. Also over to the west to get you to the pool and those types of things. There is a plan for the bike lanes. It just takes some time and we'll eventually get there.
Okay. And then to that question, so why, and I know it's a part of the plan, et cetera, but why bike lanes, particularly on Elliott from 99 to the high school?
Well, as we noted, so Elliott is considered a major collector, which per the Transportation System Plan and Development Code requires bike lanes. Also, again, as I noted, the Oregon legislature requires us to, if we are rebuilding the road, which in this scenario we would be, we are required to put in bike lanes. That's a function of the gas tax funding. So that's the requirement. If we do anything to rebuild this road, we will be required to put in bike lanes for the state legislature.
And if I can jump in, Mr. Mayor, the pavement overlay that was done in 2017 was in Jay Harris's terms, a throwaway overlay. We had to put 2 inches of asphalt on that road to keep it completely from falling apart into aggregate. They didn't do anything with that overlay to fix the structural problems of the roadway. So if you go out there today, you'll start seeing, you're already seeing alligator cracking and cracking coming up through that overlay that was done in 2016. So this road it's destined for failure again if we don't do something. So it has to be touched.
Thank you. I should say, in full disclosure, I've asked many questions of Karn and Paul over the period on this particular project, and up to and including an email that I sent Karn at 5:48 today with a series of other questions, which she kindly answered, and much of it was contained in the presentation. So thank you for that. One thing I should say too is, all of us, our thoughts should be with Paul Chu and his family as he's on extended leave. So should have mentioned that earlier, so I apologize, but our thoughts are with you, Paul. All right, other questions or comments, areas of clarification? Let me lead off with one more first. Can you tell us, now we're talking about public input. I know, I was at the event at Maple Rush. We've did a couple walking tours. I myself visited with a number of the residents. Can you tell us, Karn and Tony, what public input was incorporated into these designs? And then I'll turn it over to somebody else after that.
Certainly. So part of the public input we received was obviously sidewalks. We're proposing sidewalks. Traffic safety, calming, reducing speeding. That's where we narrowed down the lanes to 11 feet wide. Standard lane width is 12 feet. So the more you narrow the lanes, the slower people go. We also incorporated the curb bump outs at the intersections, which again narrows the road down and so that people go slower, so it doesn't look like they just have a straight shot. Also, additional trees actually allow for traffic calming and those types of things, especially as they get larger. Again, we talked about many supported bicycle facilities, the idea of again, narrowing the travel lanes to allow for larger bike lanes was part of how we came up with the buffered bike lanes. Saving trees, that's where, and also actually pulling a way to allow for people to have at least a car length in front of their garage is pulling the sidewalk curb tight in those locations to save trees and to do that. So it's not just a standard, we're doing, planter strips and bike lane or sidewalks through the entire stretch. We're pulling the sidewalk in some locations to save those trees and reduce those impacts where we can.
It should be noted that all of the driveways as it's currently laid out have that 20 feet from the garage door to the back sidewalk.
Right, so there's enough room for at least one car in front of everybody's garage. And then the drainage problems was the other one, and I don't think that's of concern of most people, but we will be fixing the drainage problems that currently exist out there. So those were the things that we looked at, trying to modify the standard cross-section to allow for, to address as many of the concerns as possible. The only one we weren't able to really do is the on-street parking. And again, to do on-street parking and bike lanes requires actually larger property impacts. If we were to put sidewalks on, say, on one side of the road and allow parking on the other, as Mr. Smith pointed out, is you still have to get people, if people are parking, say, on the east side, and they want to go to the west side, they're crossing that street at a protected location, because there's no sidewalk on that side of the street, so they're crossing to the other side to get to a sidewalk. So it becomes even more of an issue in my head if we were to do that safe-wise. So that's kind of what we did to address the concerns that we heard. So I'll leave it at that in case anybody has any other questions.
Okay. All right, other comment, Patrick.
Yeah, I have 3 more, if that's okay. First off, the bump outs at the different streets there, Hayworth and the other one, I don't remember it and I don't have it up. Did we take into account bus and supply trucks to the high school and if they could navigate those without running over them?
Yeah, we'll get into that in the final design piece, but yeah, we will take that into account. You know, right now it's just conceptual, so they haven't actually dropped, figured out what that radius is going to be and how far into the intersection it goes, but they will look at that as we're finalizing the design.
Okay, and then Mr. Ruse talked about that overlay, the throwaway overlay. How long do you think that overlay will last? And before we see some major potholes out there?
The Public Works Department won't let it go completely gunny sack. It's just a matter of how much more money they're going to have to put into it over time. So right now they'll have to go out, if this project was to not move forward, they'd have to go out and do a crack seal on it. So they'd go out and with the magic wand and spray all the cracks closed. That usually lasts for 2 to 5 years, and more cracks start popping up and more problem. And that's when potholes start to come up, and then you'll end up doing another grind, another overlay. So it can be maintained in this. It's just a matter of how much more time and money to maintain it goes into it. If nothing's done to it to maintain it, it could last another 5 years, another 10 years. Pavement doesn't always fail on the same scale from one road to the other.
And then my last one is, there's been discussion of bikes and pedestrians and not seeing any out there. I've had some experience with North College and those same arguments being used. And then we built with ODOT some nice, expensive sidewalks and bike lanes. And now there's always people out there. There's probably people out there right now. Is there any studies or any, engineering books that tell you if you build it, they will come, or is that just more anecdotal on my part?
I think there's a Tom Hanks movie.
There's a Tom Hanks movie for that. No, it's not Tom Hanks, is it? Anyway, but yeah, that's part of the issue, as Tony was talking about, is especially people that are the more casual bike rider per se. They're not going to ride down a street that there's no safe place for them to ride. People aren't going to take their children out and ride on a street that doesn't have bike lanes and or sidewalks. So when you put those in, yes, it will make a big difference. Springbrook Road's a prime example. South of 99, when ODOT put the shared use path and the bike lanes in, all of a sudden you saw people out on that street using that, those facilities. So again, it lends itself to allowing for different uses, whether it's people in a wheelchair, people on bikes, people who have other disabilities and that can't drive for whatever reason. It provides them with a safe way to navigate the city. So that's where I would say with that is that once you do build it, they do come.
All right, other comments or questions, folks? I don't get to you right away. Well, I'll throw one. Is could someone outline, as Denise mentioned earlier, what would the process of a variance be to go to something other than standard?
So Mayor, can you ask that question again?
I'll try. You know, as Councilor Bacon mentioned, you know, the variances, or certainly I would imagine, are part of the toolkit. So what would that look like if in this particular instance we wanted to look at a variance?
So we would have to take the variance to the Planning Commission, actually, and also, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, and then ultimately possibly to the City Council for a variance, but we'd have to have a good reason and list a hardship of why it would need a variance, or we change the development code and the TSP to allow for a different cross-section per se on a major collector. That would be another option, is we just change the code to allow for different cross sections or different uses, and then it would be on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
Mayor, this is Doug. Just a point of clarification. So a variance per the development code is actually a community development director decision, but there are some very stringent criteria that apply. One of those is always the difficult one, being a self-imposed hardship. Are there other ways? And so as we've looked at this project, there are some latitude in the design and construction standards that the city engineer has, addressing the issues about, you know, these curb extensions, and as Tony was talking about, on having the bike lanes and then transitioning up to the sidewalk. But once you go outside of that basic envelope that's within the TSP, it would require a transportation system plan amendment for a different type of cross-section than what's currently in that document.
All right, thank you. Other comments or questions, folks?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir, Truman.
If I could just address one of the issues that Mr. Smith brought up. He is correct that initially, after he contacted the city indicating his representation, that in discussions with Mr. Chu, we were intending to have some further conversations with him. And my understanding, and Mr. Ruse can perhaps talk about the timing of this, but those were specifically, at least initially, about Mr. Jane's concerns about parking related to his apartment. And there was some additional work that was being drawn up. And the intent was to meet on site and take a look at the new drawings and the property. But then things in the world changed, and it made it impractical to do so. So, you know, there was some delay in getting to it, and then things happened that kind of made that impossible. And then I believe from the city side, there was a little bit of miscommunication with Mr. Chu's project being picked up and not everybody having all that information. So I do apologize to Mr. Smith publicly about that. We had intended to do more kind of face-to-face communications, but those plans were sent over for his review, and my understanding is they did not satisfy his client's concerns.
Other comments or questions, folks? You know, Mr. Smith, as you know, as you mentioned, Truman, you know, has asked for a conversation. Is it worth trying to have a conversation to avoid condemnation, as is being, you know, if that's the ultimate resort, or end result? And I'll leave that to you, Truman.
Well, I will say there's an obligation under the statute to attempt to reach an agreement with property owners. So that is kind of built into this system. Whether additional time would resolve some of the concerns or not, I can't really say.
All right, folks, any other comments or questions? No? Hearing none. All right. What is your pleasure regarding resolution 2020-3666?
Mayor, can I ask a question?
Fire away.
Truman, does that mean we should probably delay this and do that first? Have them have a conversation before we make a decision?
Well, I think, and Ms. Hoffman can tell me I'm wrong. I think the primary question before the council tonight is the preferred design alternative and whether a different design should be pursued. Once that decision's made, it kind of sets the city on a specific path.
Right. Okay. You know, but I think, Denise, I think I hear where you're going with it. And again, I'm going to always be, I'm going to always try to support the idea of further conversation before we get to litigation. It may be an inevitable path anyway, but I don't know if it wouldn't, again, one guy's opinion that we put it to a date certain, allow that conversation to happen. I'm not, you know, from what I've heard, I'm not completely confident, but that's at least my opinion. So anybody else, thoughts, please?
I guess I'll weigh in. My thought is that my understanding is that we could go ahead with the resolution and those conversations are still going to happen. I guess part of my concern is that the folks that don't want this to happen are going to continue to throw out scenarios that they would prefer, whether or not that fits into the construct of what we can and are willing to do. And so if we actually have a plan in place for what it looks like our preferences, that seems like a better starting off point for the discussions rather than a back and forth of, well, these are the options that we've looked at, this is the one we prefer, and folks saying we don't like any of those options, can you do something else? I guess my thought is going forward with saying this is our preferred option here at the city, and that being the jumping off point for those conversations seems a better plan to me, because we're not talking about a project that we started last week. And so I'm not sure continuing to delay forward movement on it gets us very far at this point. I feel like we've seen a lot of this over a long period of time, and it's time for us to sort of make a decision about what scenario looks the best for our city as a whole, and then have those conversations about then what the residents of Elliott Road would like to see different, and whether or not we can mitigate those concerns.
Anyone else? All right. Well, what's your pleasure, folks?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I guess I'll make a resolution to that end. I would like to move that we adopt resolution number 2020-3666 of selecting the preferred alternative for the Elliott Road sidewalks and bike lanes project.
I second it.
Second.
Okay, Jean with a second. All right, any further discussion? All right, I will vote no on it. The reason being is that I think, as Truman mentioned, this does start us on a path by picking an option. I'd like to give it a little more time. I know, it's been a long time, but I'd like to try to resolve some of this before it gets further down the road. But that's one guy's opinion. So any other discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. Oh, go ahead, Elise.
I understand Stephanie's comments, and this is not a small project that happened overnight. I guess I also understand Rick's sentiment of wanting to make sure that all sides are at the table, even if the resolution isn't reached in favor of both parties. I am a little concerned, I guess, just of the attorney's comments as well. So I would not be, although I do think that we need to come to some sort of pathway in the near future, just in light of everything that's going on right now. I also do understand a need to sit down and make sure that all sides are heard. So I could go either way.
Patrick.
And I'm kind of in the Elise camp. I went to Newberg High School. That road looks largely the same as it did when I graduated eons ago. The school district sent us a letter saying that we needed to do that project. There's storm issues out there. It's been in the transportation system plan for at least 5 years, if not since the 70s. But then I look at the cost of the project, I look at the impacts. I'm concerned about the legal issues, and anytime a government agency comes out and tries to condemn something, it makes me extremely nervous. So, I'm 6 one, half dozen the other. It's a coin flip for me. I'm most likely going to vote yes, but that's simply because it's a road to a school. If it wasn't a road to a school, I'd vote no. So that's kind of where I'm sitting tonight.
Mayor?
Yes, Denise.
I also am going to be voting no, with the hope that we can listen to the people who live there, who are, yes, it's a road to a school. I understand that. But I really hope that both sides can come into this maybe with a little more grace for each other. So I'm hoping for the best outcome, and I think we're obligated to do this.
Jules, what do you think?
Yeah, so similar to Patrick, I would vote no for it, but I think the fact that it leads to a school where a lot of our students are walking and riding their bikes, that really for me puts it up in the air because of the long term of we haven't had any accidents or anything until now, but I think just the possibility of being potentially happening, I think makes it, for me at least, more 50-50 upon my decision.
All right, anyone else?
Mayor, this is Doug. I have a question of clarification, please. Councilor Finley did a motion to adopt the resolution, but I did not hear the alternative that was being selected.
Stephanie, I'd imagine it's the staff recommendation.
Yes, it is the staff recommendation of that buffered bike lane.
Okay. Anyone else? Comment?
Rick, I guess I just had one comment. What's the timeline that you're proposing that, or that you're suggesting that both parties come together and
Yeah, I wouldn't, I mean, looking at the calendar, I wouldn't think that it needed to go past our second meeting in June. So whatever, June 15th. And, you know, and that's dependent on the calendar too. I don't know what the forward-looking calendar looks like, but you know, if I could just clarify one thing, I'm stating this only to sort of literally leave no stone unturned. If we can resolve this without going to court, great. But don't get me wrong. As everyone has said, it is a road to a school. I believe it does need bike paths. I do believe we need sidewalks. I believe for ADA reasons and all of that we do. Now, but I'd like, if we could get to that without going to court, I think that'd be great. I'm not sure that that's going to happen, but that's my point. But I'm totally in support of the idea of improving the road, which I think, as Patrick said, should have happened, well, when he graduated like 6 years ago from high school. So anyway, but we have a motion on the floor, right? A motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor of resolution 2020-3666, a resolution selecting a preferred alternative and authorizing the acquisition of right-of-way and easements for the North Elliott Road sidewalks and bike lane project. Let's head to a roll call, please, Sue.
Yes, I was just about to suggest that. Councilor Piros.
Yes.
Councilor Johnson.
No.
Councilor Yarnell Holloman. Elise.
Sorry, no.
Councilor Martinez Plancarte.
No.
Mayor Rogers.
No.
Councilor Bacon.
No.
Councilor Finley.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I have 2 yes, 5 no, motion failed.
All right, thank you. But again, I think the sentiment was that we see this in a fairly short amount of time again, in the hopes that we will have discussion with the interested parties between now and then.
So if I can clarify that, you know, discussion, bring it back. We can put it on the calendar for the 15th.
Okay.
I guess I want to maybe have a little bit of discussion if possible between the counselors as far as what you would see as a positive outcome of that discussion.
Okay. All right.
Just given the time frame, especially.
Yep. Anybody want to start in as to what that might mean?
I'll start since I think I was the instigator. I would like to see an outcome where people, I don't believe the citizens felt like they had a seat at the decision-making table, first off. And I think that we need to fix that in the future. When you start from the beginning, you start with the people sitting around the table with you to begin with. So now we're making up for a lot of bad feelings, and so I think I want to have them have a conversation, everybody coming to the table on both sides with open minds and the willingness to work together to get the best outcome for everyone. And that includes the safety of the kids and the families that live there and have to be on that street. So my goal would be that everyone could walk away with at least an understanding of the other person's needs, and that we can move forward in a way that doesn't end us up having to take someone's property, because I am morally opposed to that if we don't have to do it.
All right, anyone else?
I just want to make sure that, am I clear though that we're also inviting the folks to the table that haven't hired an attorney to be heard as well? Because we've heard from both sides, right? We've heard from people who live in the area that want it to happen and people that don't want to happen. So I guess the conversation sounds a lot like we want to hear from the folks that don't want to have it happen, but I want to make sure that we are including the folks that said that they live in the area and that they're concerned that this project hasn't gone far enough or quickly enough.
Yeah, I got to say that between the couple neighborhood walks, between the open house, et cetera, I think the city and the responsiveness, I think, to a lot of the questions that have been asked. I think the only thing that may not have happened is the discussion specifically with the attorney representing the three parties. And I think for me, it's more to make sure that it's been heard. I don't have a whole lot of confidence that we will be far away from essentially the staff suggestion. But in my opinion, I would be willing to listen, with a date certain of June 15th.
Mr. Mayor, if I might.
Sure, Patrick.
And I'm much like you. I see this as a negotiation with the impacted property owners, both who want the project and who don't. I know Kittleson and also our staff do a fine job of public outreach. I think this is a project that was, I think this is a project that's being impacted by other development down on 99. And I think that project was controversial, and that controversy has slid over into this. It's a street that's going to get built. I mean, I live on a street that's stubbed out, and I know that the property next door, if they annex, I'm going to have a major thoroughfare in front of my place. But I knew that was happening. So, I on one hand, I don't hold out a lot of hope that we're going to get resolution to this. But on the other hand, it's like, well, let's give it a shot and see. I'd like to hear, from our staff what exactly they want, because there's going to be a project there. I'm going to vote to approve a project one way or another on the 15th. And so, you can work with us, and that's what I hope. I hope we can work with something that everybody can handle and get along with and support. However, that is a project that needs to be done. If for no other reason, we have an overlay there with storm drain issues, and we're going to dump more than $3 million into fixing that road for the next 15, 20 years than we would have if we just fix it and do it right and get it set up for ADA and pedestrians. So, that's kind of where I'm sitting.
All right, Dan, did that help?
So I guess, yes, it did. I guess I heard the key piece being, an open discussion with all parties, but specifically addressing those folks who are essentially represented and the potential there for some resolution amicably as far as moving forward with a project, one of the many alternatives, and or I guess during the discussion we talked about variances. So I guess that probably would be on the table, but given the time frame, I'm not sure we have a lot to work with there. But that's kind of what I heard. Does that make sense? Trying to sum up. Okay.
You got it.
Okay.
All right. Are we okay with that then, folks, for the time being? All right. All right. So let's hope for some kind of a compromise that everybody can live with. Anyway, or at least an understanding of each other's positions. All right, let's move on now to item 8. This is resolution 2020-3657, a resolution withdrawing an award of transient lodging tax destination development marketing grant funds to Wolves and People, approved by resolution number 2018-3453. And I believe that's Mr. Rux.
Thank you, Mayor. Doug Rux, Community Development Director. So as listed in your staff report, this particular issue goes back to when we have the Transient Lodging Tax Ad Hoc Committee. So we created 2 grant programs, a small grant program and then a destination development and marketing grant program. The latter came in mid-2017. That time we went out with proposals. We received a number of responses. As noted in your report, there were 6. The TLT committee met back then in November, reviewed those, and came forward with a recommendation to the City Council to fund 3 of those projects. One was the Newberg Downtown Wineries Association, Strategic Multimedia Presence, the Cultural Center, Culinary Enrichment Center, and the last one was Wolves and Peoples for their Steins Divines Trail. That went to the City Council. City Council referred it back to the TLT committee. They met in March of 2018, developed a recommendation. That came back to the City Council then in May of 2018. There were 2 conditions in the award of a grant. One of those was that Wolves and People needed to contact Yamhill County about any necessary land use approval. City staff reached out to Yamhill County and was informed that it would require a conditional use application permit to Yamhill County to have a trail that would connect Wolves and People with A to Z Wineworks. The second is that Wolves and People need to enter into a contract, a grant contract. So the first step of that was figuring out if there needed to be land use approval and going through that process. So this award was done back in May of 2018. We are now in May of 2020. Land use application had not been submitted to Yamhill County. A grant contract had not been entered into. So staff reached out to Wolves and People to let them know with the issues that were going on with COVID-19, the reduced funding that was going on, funding allocations to the chamber for the visitor center to visit Newberg, that we were going to bring forward to the council a proposal to withdraw that grant because of the 2-year lag that has occurred. In doing that, in your packet there was Christian DiBenedetti, who owns Wolves and People, submitted a piece in that thanks the city essentially. While they did consult with the county planners, they had other issues that were going on with their agricultural operation and their brewery. They've been heavily involved in some legislation at the legislature for farm brewing and agritourism statewide. And I think he concluded indicating we look forward to working on more innovative ideas together in the future. What was unique at the time by the TLT and the council was sitting was supposedly the only interpretive trail system that would connect a brewery and a winery as a tool to attract tourism, individuals coming to Newberg and to the greater Yamhill County area, which is one of the things that is allowed under state statute. You can fund things like signs, visitor centers, trails. We looked into this originally, could a trail be funded? So where we're at this point in time is the resolution is a proposal to withdraw that particular grant proposal. Thank you.
All right, any questions, folks? Hearing none. All right, any further discussion, anyone? All right, again, this is to withdraw $30,000 worth of funding to Wolves and People for a trail. All right, hearing none, do we have a motion?
Mayor, I can make a motion.
Please do.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt resolution 2020-3657.
And a second, folks?
Second.
That's Jules with a second. All right, any further discussion? Let's go by roll call, Sue, if we could.
Yes, sir. Councilor Piros.
Yes.
Councilor Johnson.
Yes.
Councilor Yarnell Holloman.
Yes.
Councilor Martinez Plancarte.
Yes.
Mayor Rogers.
Yes.
Councilor Bacon.
Yes.
Councilor Finley.
Yes.
Mayor, I have 7-0. Motion passes.
Thank you, Sue. All right, moving on to item 8C, discussion of action plan for council goals. And I believe this is Dan.
This is, yeah, so the best for last, let's hope. So the background for this, this is somewhat of a work session item, trying to take advantage of the time, just put it in this slot. But, you know, as you well know, I think, I arrived at the city just after City Council had adopted the goals for the calendar year for 2020, and also some of the things that attracted me to the city. Oh, we can go back to the beginning, actually. So some of the things that attracted me to the position here were the many plans and things that were in place, including the community vision document that was adopted in August 2019. You know, I try to keep both of those, the council goals and the community vision, front of mind. For me, I'm somewhat task oriented, and so I've got the council goals on my desk and the community vision on the whiteboard in my office. And so, you know, it's really, I feel incumbent on me and as the manager to try to move forward, make progress on those things that were laid out for me. So really this discussion, I'm going to try to walk you through a process for goal implementation, a way to make some progress in 2020, noting that it's almost June. And so we've been hit sideways a little bit by the coronavirus and some of those things, but I think we're still making progress on some of these goals. And so my thought is, you know, walk you through this process and get some discussion going on implementation. So the way that I'm going to do this, if you can go to the next slide, is as you may have seen, the City Council questions. I'm going to rephrase those at the end, but they'll help frame the, whoa, let's not move quite so fast. I got an itchy trigger finger. Sue wants to get out of here. That's the key there. Anyway, I'm going to rephrase these at the end. Just, I want to put them out here now for you to think about this as we walk through the presentation. One question being that a lot, obviously, as I mentioned, the coronavirus in particular has happened since January. Would the City Council like to change or clarify any of the 2020 goals? Or are there new goals? You know, something that maybe is an adaptation as you think about coronavirus response. Two, does the order of the that is proposed by staff in addressing the goals in work session meet the council expectations? And we'll talk about that at a later slide, you know, sort of the order that we had talked about as staff, which is really driven much by kind of things we're already clear on, but also getting some clarity on some things as well. Because there are a variety of things here, some open-ended things that are hard to quantify, qualify, and achieve, such as sustainability. Or you think about urban renewal, where we've got a very specific path forward that has been articulated and we're working through. So just trying to balance those competing goals and priorities. Three, how would council like the staff to involve community input? And you know, based on the discussion from Elliott Road, I mean, it seems bedrock that community input should be part of these discussions and implementations. And so that's one thing that we should probably talk about, how we would want to get and gather input on specific actions. And I think that there is probably a difference for each one in some ways, because some of these goals have to do with gathering or creating a plan. Some of them are more internal culture oriented. And so I would think that there's probably a difference in terms of public input and maybe not when it comes to some of these things. And then finally, the last question was really around trying to define success. So we I've sort of laid out the idea that we're 6.5 months is about all we've got left of the calendar year. So just trying to make sure that we're able to move forward and achieve some goals. Next slide, please. So the intent for me right now is, and really thinking about each one of these as we bring them forward, the intent would be to clarify the goal as we see it, as staff would essentially make a presentation to the council, prepare a list of actions that are already underway that we see as addressing the intent of the goal, be able to move forward with an action plan, whether we add items or not, Whether we would like to, I would like to have project teams. That's a cultural element for me. I strongly believe in multidisciplinary teams, both internal and external in some cases, where we might have partners from the community help us. But I think trying to represent a lot of different perspectives helps to create better work. And doing that all at once in the beginning is a whole lot more effective, because by the end, if you've not gotten input, you're going to be right back at the beginning. So making sure that we've got that built into our system, then essentially being able to gather council input and community input through the process of work, and making sure we have timeframes to complete all those things, and bringing them back to council and the community to assure that we are achieving the plans. Next slide. So the idea that I laid out in the beginning, really focused on council goals and the community vision document, but there are other plans that fold into these plans as well. So just listed two, but there are other things that we have to thread in. And that's really sort of what I'm hoping to do, is really think about not how are we accomplishing one program, by essentially saying the priority is council goals and we'll wait on anything else, but trying to intertwine those things together so that we're actually hopefully accomplishing the things that are consistent across multiple plans. And then assuring that we're making sure that we have time for partnerships and using that as a strategy. Next slide. So just representing the staff discussion, we've had a couple discussions of the city's department heads and leadership team. And so, really the feedback that I've gotten so far is that staff is really always looking to steward existing resources, to be thoughtful about how much things cost, how much time they're taking, and really trying to make sure that we're doing what's deemed important. And so it's often what I was told, it's hard when there are 13 priorities, but if there are 5, this is much more manageable. But even within that, how do we know we're doing the right thing, especially when we have day-to-day work? I think that's pretty normal when it comes to plan implementation, goal implementation, time being finite, that it's a choice of how we spend our time. So it's a this or that, often when we think about accomplishing goals. We want to make sure that we have a clear work plan for that purpose, so that we're making sure we're achieving things in a timely manner, but also in a consistent manner with council expectations and the community's expectations. The idea that we have annual targets, but also things that are long range. And so we would want to flesh those out, those long range things, into manageable sort of annual bites. And something that's really important to me is the PDCA, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. So if you're not familiar with Plan, Do, Check, Act, it's really an iterative model that allows for continuous improvement, because you're constantly testing and creating pilots and essentially trying to improve what you do, so that you're not essentially stuck doing the same old thing the same old way. Hopefully you're creating efficiencies with your time and resources, financial resources to do more. Next slide, please. So just a thought on implementation was really having these discussions to clarify, essentially providing updates and where we've had a headwind, something that maybe we didn't foresee as a group, and we can just kind of speak to that. Coronavirus maybe, for instance, and making sure we've got agreement on a work plan. We're ready to move forward on some things, and so there is work underway, and we want to be able to make sure that those work plans are communicated to the public, and we're understanding as well that, again, there's trade-offs on how we spend our time. So if we're pulled off of task on an agreed upon work plan, it has impacts on the ability to stick to timeline and to actually achieve the work plan. The next slide is the City Council's goals. Just to really quickly summarize, the next slide. Thanks. The customer service, diversity, equity, and inclusion, those two are, to me, very internally focused. Obviously, the output of customer service, of a customer service culture, is going to be felt internally and externally, but and arguably, I suppose, same with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But those I see, and I'd like clarification as more internally focused. Affordable housing, affordable and workforce housing, and urban renewal plan and authority, and a sustainability program. Those seem like they're a little more outwardly focused. Next slide. So the themes of the community vision, you know, there's a lot of actions underneath each one. Some more than others are tagged to the city. And I understand from the development of that process, we were tagged in areas that there sort of was no one to step up and take responsibility or ownership of those goals. So even some of those may be things that we can find a partner in the community to help us with. But those being community engagement, community leadership, cultural assets, economic development, and livability and development. Next slide. Okay, so one thing that I would also like to emphasize is, you know, the cultural part of this. You know, the idea of doing the work internally, you know, to me, creating core values that are our mission, vision, and values that help us define, you know, not just why we exist, but where do we want to go in the future, having a vision, and then making sure we understand who we want in our organization and supporting the community by articulating clear values for the staff that we hire and ourselves as a community. I think some of that work has already been done, and maybe it's been done a lot, because we've got at least 10 mission statements on the city's website, just doing a quick search. Some of them for the organization as a whole, some for departments, some for boards and commissions even. To me, you know, the mission that I generally operate under is pretty simple. It's to make people's lives better. And that can come in a whole lot of different forms, but it's trying to create the system that everyone else can operate under so that we are achieving that goal. As I said before, team approach is super important to me. And, you know, to me, it's the teamwork makes the dream work kind of concept, that we're pulling the same direction because we've had enough discussions up front to really get there and understand the purpose, how our jobs tie into each other, and to the overall vision of the organization and to the community. Next slide. So very rough, somewhat, I don't know, alliterative list of core values that I had come up with was clear communication. You know, to me, communication really is a key to how things get done. If we can listen to each other, if we understand intent as best we can, if we can, you know, really listen constructively in a way that, you know, we are able to have dialogue and sometimes disagreement and have it openly, and include ways also not just to disagree, but to agree and to celebrate. I think that's a real important element for me. The consistent, equitable actions. I mean, I think the consistency element, there's a concept out there that, you know, the idea of Starbucks, that you know what you're going to get when you order that latte or that, you know, that coffee. You know what it's going to taste like. You know the consistency of it, because there's a process that goes into it every single time. It's essentially the same process over and over again. I worked in an organization that completed the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award, which is a federal government program. And the idea of it was really to get third-party input on a regular basis that then gave you opportunities for improvement. And there's a framework that they rate you on, but it also helps to guide, you know, essentially the iterative process of providing service, so that you're able to, you know, everyone in your organization understands X or Y thing in order to be as consistent as possible. That is and has been deemed the hallmark of great organizations, that people understand what they're going to get when they are engaged in a specific type of process. I think creativity should be our calling card in the city, that we are looking for ways to do more with less, and to have fun doing it, that we should be whimsical at times and not quite take ourselves as seriously as I think local government tends to take itself, in a way that's hopefully constructive, that is supportive to the community and the community needs. I think collaborative, again, hit on how important that is to me, that partnerships and collaboration really, both from a resource standpoint and also just the shared knowledge standpoint, are super important. And then finally, customer service is a city council goal for us, for core values. It was stated as such that it should be a core value of an operational culture. And so, that to me makes me think of servant leadership, which really speaks to the character of people, that they lead with ethics and principles, that we have an organization that puts its people first and is caring, that we are able to communicate well, we collaborate well, we have foresight, so we're planning well, that we're thinking in systems and approaching problems that way. So looking for solutions across a lot of different areas as opposed to just a one-off solution. And then finally, that we're leading morally. Next slide, please. So the proposed process is essentially a simple one. It's essentially a work session per topic, making sure that we have opportunities to dig in as a group, that the city council provides clarification and flesh to some of these concepts that are a little bit harder to hone in for staff, that we have an action plan and we're making progress. We're continually reporting on our progress using our community engagement model. Next slide. So the schedule, I sprung on staff a little bit, so I sort of apologize for that. I don't really apologize all that much, because I think we need to make sure that there's a lead. We need to have a time frame that's aggressive. The intent here is work session per topic, and you'll notice that I blended some of the topics because I felt that they were somewhat similar. My goal would be that we present on the topic, really talking about what we see as a definition, getting some clarification from you all on that definition for that topic, and an approach that includes work that's already underway. So not necessarily new work, but work that be clarified that we are actually achieving the goals. And then we outline new work that can or should be accomplished. So starting with sustainability, like I said, to me, that's a very broad goal. A sustainability program has specific actions. And so I think understanding what we all mean collectively by sustainability, some of those goals could, in my mind, lead to livability and or fall under the livability and development in the community vision document. But starting there, working through economic development and housing, which felt a little bit more straightforward and might have a little bit more of a coronavirus flavor to them these days. But working through that into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we can decide or agree if we like the language or if we want to use something else. But then into customer service, which is also somewhat broad, but I think the two departments that I selected, I think are very interested in outward facing customer service. So starting there, what is the product that we're putting on the streets, as it were, or in the library? And then maybe learning from that, and then having a discussion about community leadership and community engagement. And finally, urban renewal, mainly urban renewal at the end, because I think it's already well-defined and on a path. And so hopefully it'll jibe. So that next slide is the last one. These are the questions again. And again, my intent is really to have some feedback on the process and feedback on the timing. And you can leave those questions up and leave it there, I guess, for council discussion.
All right, folks, discussion. Well, I'll start. Ed, would you want to change or clarify the 2020 goals? Anyone?
I don't want to go first if somebody else is going to go. But I will. A lot has happened since January, and a lot of it, other than COVID, a lot has happened in the city that I feel is positive. But a lot has happened with COVID. So I don't really think, I do think we need to clarify the goals, because a lot of the descriptors could mean anything. But I do think we should stay on that path for the most part.
All right, anyone else? Other thoughts? All right, what about, does the order proposed by staff for addressing the 2020 city council goals meet expectations?
I'll go again. I think they're fine.
Yep. How would the council like the staff to involve community input?
Right from the very get-go. I'm sorry, go ahead, Rick.
I'll weigh in. I mean, if we're talking about things, DEI or that kind of thing, or customer service, I mean, I'd really like to, have people that are familiar with these particular topics come in. I mean, and if that means the one particularly with communities, customer service, you've got a couple police and library that probably see the most people, but I still think that community development, building department, engineering also have a fair amount of public contact, and would like to see that one as well. All right, anyone else about community input? All right, what about success within 1 year for each goal look like? Denise, you got the hot trigger finger tonight.
Well, I want somebody else to go. I don't like it when I'm the only one that talks.
Someone else.
Okay.
It's you.
It's me. So I think this is how I envision success. I'm a one step at a time person, and I don't expect us to reach these goals in one day. But in 1 year, I would like to see people getting along at the city level with the big C. People that we have set goals of what that will look like long term, and have a strategic plan to get there. Really just making sure we're all talking about the same thing is really important to me, because I've been on several boards, and you talk about something and you get 2 years later and you realize that's not what we started, and why am I still here? Because you're not doing what I thought we were doing. Anyway, so really just making sure that we're all using the same language, we all understand what the final outcome will be, and the steps, and I'm not talking just the city council, I'm talking the city council and the staff, we're all on the same page of what that looks like. And then, steady, one step at a time, moving forward every day, getting better.
All right, anyone else? Other thoughts?
Don't make me call on you.
Yeah. Well, I would love it if we were, for instance, if we say, and I'll pick one, sustainability, say that's fairly broad. I would love to see by department what it is that was accomplished, during a period of time. And, it would be easier probably for Public Works to come up with something maybe than the police department for sustainability, but who knows? I don't know. And if you say, well, we're building cover, which is causing less damage to vehicles, so consequently that's good for whatever. We don't have to replace them as quickly. That's sustainable, I guess. But I think that creativity you mentioned, Dan, I would like to see sort of by department for those goals, I guess. Too much. Good.
I mean, I like trackers, so I would love to see like a quarterly tracker type thing by department. I guess that's what I always envisioned would, and I mean, COVID, I understand, and I would hope that these goals last longer than a year, and that they become at least a couple years. And of course we could have iterations, but or add or remove where necessary. But I think, yeah, some sort of report out tracker by department would be great.
All right. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll go.
Sure.
I watched with interest the Fed chairman last night talk about the challenges we face in the economy in the next 12 months. And then I look at the goals that Dan has put up here and boiled down for us. And I really feel that in the next 12 months, customer service is going to be critical if we're going to have our businesses stay in business and have new businesses start up. How the city responds to that. I think you're already seeing that with the development of the 3 programs that Dan outlined in his city manager report. So I think we're well on the way to that one. I'm with Elise. I like trackers. I like measurables. And we have measurables for customer service right now. The second thing that I think in the next year that I think is extremely important is affordable and workforce housing. And the reason I say that is that I don't see that. Before, it felt like we were working on a systemic problem. Now with COVID, it feels like we're working on a short-term and systemic problem. And so how we as a city can promote assistance for municipal service statements, how we can assist, if people start losing their housing, and the hotel program is part of that. But, I think that we need to pivot a little bit on that one in the next 12 months. And I'd like to see more short-term kind of solutions for what we're facing. I don't know what those look like. I'm just spitballing. And then also the urban renewal plan and authority. I think if that had been up and running right now today, we would have more tools to assist our businesses and our property owners. So, for me, the next 12 months, and I'm just looking at economics, would be those 3 goals for me. Not to say that the others aren't important. I think we can do many things at the same time, but know that those are going to be my 3. So.
All right, anybody else? Dan, one thing I do like actually about the 5 goals is, with the exception of urban renewal, they are broad. And I actually prefer that than a task list as opposed. I mean, I like tasks under goals that you can track, but I like broader goals, and I think that's what we were really trying to achieve with these goals. So.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's often nice to have an outcome with a goal. What do you see as the optimal state? And so that may be, as we bring these forward, something we'll try and talk about. It's nice to have a vision so that we're able to, share that and try to help achieve it, so we know we're on the right path.
Well, sounds good. I don't know, it looks good. I'd be excited to get into the goals more. Anything else, folks? Do you have what you need from us, Dan, for this to get started?
Yeah, I think at least to get started, I might have to call on people next time, but I want to make sure that I get all the counselors' feedback, and so that it's not, those who speak up versus those who don't. So we can do that offline as well. But, it's important for staff to make sure that they've heard from everybody, and that, they're supported in the direction they're taking.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. All right, then moving on. Any committee reports, folks? Anything going on out there that you want to share? Zoom meetings, probably have a couple of them, All right. Yep.
The cultural district met by Zoom As you can imagine, it was a very short meeting as pretty much everything has been canceled that goes on in the cultural district. So no tunes on Tuesday, the weddings that the cultural center would normally be doing are not happening. Lavender Festival has been canceled. The summer library lawns programs are going to look very differently, although the library has done a really good job of really stepping up and doing things differently. And so that's not going away altogether. It just is going to look a little bit different. But for the most part, everything for the cultural district is really going to be on hold until we better know what's going to happen and what those things are going to be looking like. Unfortunately, at my house, it was a sad day to learn that there will be no big trucks parked out by the library, since Public Works Day is always the favorite at our house. And so we were disappointed that we aren't going to be standing on the lawn getting poured on while looking at fire trucks, but that is what it is.
All right, who else?
Rick,
Yes, sir, Patrick.
I canceled all my bypass meetings. I'm very depressed about this.
When I saw that notice, I immediately thought of you, my friend. All right, who else? We haven't heard from him this evening. How's Lincoln doing? What's Lincoln? There he is.
I can say that the Newberg Housing Solutions group met virtually last week and had a special meeting, I guess, to talk about or hear from our friends that run the Newberg Emergency Shelter. YCAP participated, and really grateful for YCAP and the different cities, including ours, that contributed to the motel voucher program, and it's going really well, as Dan indicated. So really proud to be a part of that. But with the emergency housing shelter, just looking into different opportunities that Philip Higgins may or may not be able to assist with, of just knowing what properties are available for buy or lease right now in the downtown, off downtown strip. And reason being just a need to find a more permanent location for their work. So hopeful on that. Also just trying to understand what, as a city, we have the ability to support with something like this. And if there's any sort of assistance across the country that different local governments have taken to support unsheltered folks. Similar to what Patrick said, I think that, temporary housing solutions are going to be more and more important as this public health crisis turns into an economic crisis. So, yeah, and then just exploring different funding opportunities as well to try to put some financial backing behind that program and group of people.
Yeah, very good. And you and I will catch up this week, maybe. All right, who else? Anybody else?
Mr. Mayor, remember your reminder about Alan Edwards?
Oh, yes, I will not forget. I've got my note right here. But let me just make sure, you guys, anybody else, anything to report out? Okay, well, good. Jules, again, thank you for arranging that call with Unidos and all. It was very important. I know Dan and I both came away with a lot of understanding. We're still doing the community partner calls every Friday afternoon, and trying to keep the videos relatively interesting, which is always a challenge. But otherwise, yes, Sue reminded me, Alan Edwards, the Planning Commission, long-term Planning Commissioner, will be stepping down as he is moving to San Antonio here in the not too distant future. So if you see Alan out and about and his wife, please thank them and wish them all the best on their ventures to a place that I've never been, but I understand is beautiful. So there you go. Anything else, folks, for the good of the order?
And we will be planning to commissioner. So
No,
if you know of someone that wants to apply for the planning commission, please have them contact the city recorder.
Yes, please do.
Can I ask one question that I'm a little fearful I may have missed this? So just slap me on the wrist if I did, but could I ask a question about something or one of the resolutions?
Sure.
Okay. So on the Wolves and People allocation going back to the TLT dollars, is that going, how will that allocation be distributed? Will that go back to, help me, where is it going to go?
Yeah, I see Doug reaching for his mic, so here you go.
Well, Matt told me to mute it because I got the air conditioner in here and it blows, and so it rattles in the background. So the $30,000 goes back into the TLT pot. City Council will have some ability to make some decisions of what you're going to do with that money. So Truman and I had a conversation this afternoon. He provided an interpretation of the contract. It's always best if you have your legal counsel read the contracts. I can read them one way. Legal counsel can read them differently. So the $30,000, so the way the contract is structured is the chamber currently has a fixed amount for this fiscal year. And they get paid on a monthly basis. Then in the next tier was the destination marketing grant. And then the third tier, and so there was the 35.06% that goes to TLT. So then it first went to the chamber, then there was the commitment for the grant, and then what was left over was the, went to Visit Newberg. In the contract, there was these built up funds. The built up funds, we had made an estimate of what they were going to be, and there was a timing schedule when we would pay those built up funds. And we did that by the end of January of 2020. So now there's this $30,000 that's there. So the council has some choices of what you do with the allocation of those funds. You could take it and split it somehow, but then you have some choices about timing as well. So let me back up a little bit. So there's $30,000 that are sitting there now. The council has a choice of what they can do with that $30,000 this fiscal year. Or council can make a decision what you're going to do with that $30,000 come July 1st. In July 1st, it could be that you hold the money, because there's other things for tourism, like we mentioned, that can be done. I mentioned earlier this evening, you could use for signs in convention centers and tourist-related facilities. You could choose to allocate those funds out. The chamber's contract will be coming to you on June 1st. You could add some additional money to the chamber contract or not. You could add some additional money that would go to Visit Newberg next fiscal year or not. Or you could choose to hold that $30,000.
And what was the intent? So originally it was just a part of the TLT dollars that were being held. Is that correct?
It was TLT dollars, so it has to be spent on tourism as statute. And then, as we talked about earlier this evening, city attorney had provided some material to the TLT committee about how you can spend it. So you can spend it on promotion, you can spend it on marketing, you can spend it on tourist-related facilities. And so in that memo, Truman laid out what we can do. And so the council's going to have a choice what happens with that $30,000. Does not automatically go to Visit Newberg.
When are we likely to see that, do you think, Doug?
Well, I think your first opportunity to have a discussion, and part of it is on June 1st when we bring forward the chamber's one-year contract. Then your second opportunity would be on June 15th if you wanted me to bring something back. And then, of course, there's an opportunity in July.
Well, you're also going to get the budget on June 1st. And so, if there's a change of allocation reflected in the budget, that would be another opportunity.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions, folks?
Elise?
I'm sorry.
Did that answer your question, Elise?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, folks. Anything else for the good of the order? Patrick.
When we do talk about that tourism money, could we also have some history about the chamber's move back downtown? And I keep hearing rumors about agreements and handshake deals, and I'm curious, as an official city agreement, what, I'd just like some history there the next time we talk about this, or do that offline if you want.
So on June 1st, there will be some history, and it will note that the chamber is moving back downtown in May or June of 2020. Part of that history, Pat, briefly was, the chamber was downtown. They moved out onto Portland Road. At the time, with staff that was here, was an encouragement to come back to downtown, to be more centrally located. So they have a signed lease. I've seen the lease, reviewed the lease, because I needed that in order to work up the budget numbers that went to the budget committee, and also needed that for part of the chamber contract for the visitor center to understand the finances. But yes, we can provide you some more detail on June 1st.
All right. Any other comments, questions, concerns? All right. Well, I got 10 o'clock straight up, folks. Well timed to get to exactly 10. Nicely done. So otherwise, we will talk to you all again soon. And I got one parting thought for you. All right. And this was part of this community little thing that we did, partner call. I'd like to ask you to think about this. What would it take for you to support some kind of an ordinance that required the wearing of masks in public in Newberg? You don't have to answer now. Just think about it. There it is. I'll leave you with that one. All right. Otherwise, anything else? All right. Thank you all. Thank you, and we'll talk soon. Stay healthy.
You too.